You wake before the bell and feel the room breathing with the canal. Fog sits on the glass like a quiet hand, softening the edges of everything it touches. You lift the shutter. The hinge gives a civil scrape. The wood a smell of old oil and wet rope. You rest your forearms on the sill and let the chill ride your sleeves until it remembers its manners and settles. You dress by the order that never argues. Stockings first, the darn sitting neat at the heel. Trousers that remember last winter's boards. The weekday shirt with the collar that has chosen its angle for life. The bridgehouse stove waits the way tools wait, patient, unimpressed, ready. You twist shavings, lay a thumb of peat. Flame gathers like a thought finishing itself. The kettle slides onto the side where water learns to whisper. Outside, the span holds the night's damp evenly. You test your step heel, weight, hand on rail, as if greeting an old friend who dislikes surprises. Mist beads on iron in neat lines. Your glove leaves a brief dark path, and the iron pretends not to notice. Beneath, the canal wears pewter and keeps its secrets at arm's length. Somewhere, a mast ring ticks against a pin. Somewhere, a cart finds a rut and complains in wooden vowels. These sounds arrange the morning. The lever waits where it always waits. Your palm knows the polish without looking. You try a small test. Down an inch, feel the counterweight breathe, let it back. The rope up in the little house is dark with wet. One drop clings to a fiber to argue with gravity, and then decides not to. You nod at it. It does not nod back. The bridge prefers low conversation, and you oblige. The ledger opens to the fresh page with sensible resistance. Paper this weight asks for tidy hands and modest plans. Ink rests in its well like a small pond that knows wind is inevitable. The nib takes its first touch and draws a line that tells the day it has begun. Hour noted, weather noted, canal steady at winter level. A phrase you use each year returns to service, as dependable as boots. The page looks less like possibility and more like a plan. Steam begins to speak at the kettle spout. You coax a chicory brew that refuses to pretend it is anything else. The smell is bitter and honest. You approve. You hold the cup with both hands and stand at the window while the city admits it is awake. A door opens just wide enough for a bucket, then closes with decision. A woman passes with scarf pulled high, walking like someone who knows each cobble intimately and is glad you do not. You return a nod she does not see. From upstream, a barge declares itself as a direction before it becomes an object. First the sound, a long syllable meaning I am here without wasting dignity on details. Then the hint of a cap, then the bow, then a covered mound that could be timber or peat. You answer with your own practiced noise and feel yourself become instructions. Latch up, hand to lever, weight set into the long hinge of shoulder and back. The span consents to rise. Friction performs its calm song. The lever's skin warms under your grip. Joints murmur along the grain. The counterweight lifts in its house with formal politeness. Each plank offers a small report as it decides to be vertical for a moment. You prefer this part. It contains everything you can actually do. The barge noses under with a courtesy wave from the skipper, a man who thinks in lengths of rope. You could list rope you do not strictly need to list. When the span returns, it settles like a cat choosing a windowsill. You secure the latch and let your hand rest there, a heartbeat longer than required. Habit has become ritual and therefore harmless. The fog loosens by degrees, trading blankness for edges. A stepped gable reappears with its missing corner, which you prefer to the intact side, because a flaw proves time is present. You accept its opinion as information and proceed. You sweep the threshold of grit the fog has kindly delivered. 3 damp leaves arrive from an undetermined tree and adhere to the broom with purpose. You peel them away and stage them on the coal scuttle for later. The wick trimmer on the shelf sits straight, and the rest of the shelf falls into line. You inventory like a priest counting reliquaries. Oil rag, spare pin, slate, chalk, pencil shaved to a disciplined point. A small tin of tallow, a bell somewhere, expresses a number. Your pocket watch, after consideration, agrees. It is a relief when time cooperates with itself. You make a neat line in the ledger. 1 passage, courteous signal, no incident. A modest dot at the far margin pleases you for reasons you have never bothered to explain. It means the world did not feel the need to surprise you. The chicory has cooled into a taste you would not defend in conversation. Across the water, the day fills in like a map receiving ink. A boy with a basket crosses the quay and disappears into a door polished by sleeves. A cat tests the width of the railing and finds it adequate. The gull considers stealing the cat's composure and revises its plan. You breathe with the canal because there are efficient ways to agree with the world, and this is one of them. The air smells of wet wood and beginnings. You straighten the lantern glass, not because it needs it, but because the gesture fits the hour. You pinch a stray thread from your cuff and store it in your pocket, a souvenir for no audience. The lever stands where it always stands. The rope keeps its counsel. You approve. You are here to count, to lift, to lower, to write, to wait. The morning, having said what it came to say, begins. You begin with the rope because the rope begins with you. All night it has stood in the weather. You give it the small ceremony it prefers. You take the fall at the lowest reach where it comes down the frame, hemp polished by years of palms and rain. You press a thumb into the lay and feel the quiet strength that says it will not dream of parting when asked to work. You lean close to the sheave and look for the shine of trouble. The wheel carries a shallow groove, clean enough for morning. A grain of grit clicks under your nail. You lift it free and set it on the rail. The pin that keeps the wheel centered wears a slim collar where friction makes its case. Your rag remembers other seasons, stripes of oil and tallow, and last week's drizzle. You fold it to a clean square and draw it once along the rope where it meets iron. A little dart comes away, enough to feel the change from damp to ready. You touch the splice with 2 fingers and find the crown tight, the tuck seated. The knot tells you nothing new, which is the best report. The lever has its own manners. You reach for it with the economy of a handshake you have used for years. The handle is warm near the stove's breath and colder at the far end where the window drafts have their say. You wrap your fingers, shift your weight, and test the hinge so slightly that the counterweight merely considers movement and decides against it. The latch sits in its iron bed, simple as a yes. You lift it and hear the small permission it offers, a click not loud enough to announce itself, and not shy enough to be missed. The long arm answers with a sigh of metal that has spent its life being useful. You lower it again and listen for the faithful meeting, tongue into keeper, a note like the period at the end of a sentence. Up in the counterweight house, the heavy block lives like a quiet neighbor. You open the little door and peer into the gloom. Wood cheeks rise around iron that never learned to boast. You check the bolts by touch rather than sight, finding each square head with your knuckles and then your fingertips. No play, no mystery. A fine dust sits in one corner where wood thinks about becoming memory. You brush it away and postpone the thought. Back at the chain, you turn the grease box in your palm. The lid opens with the delicacy of a secret everyone knows. The smear inside is thick and obedient. You take a thin trace on a fingertip and walk it along the links where they make their round. Each link wears a bright mouth where it kisses the next. You admire the discipline of parts agreeing to meet in the same place every day. You give the span a measured lift, no more than the width of a hand. The planks loosen from their night thought and become a machine again. Each joint answers in its dialect, a dry whisper from the nearest pin, a throat, clearing from the far hinge, the soft exhale of rope, the almost audible shrug of the counterweight above. You hold the lever where the balance is kind, then let it down and listen for settlement wood, accepting wood, iron accepting iron. You draw the slate from its nail and make a mark only you understand. It is not a number and not a letter. It is a shape you began using a dozen winters ago, when the leather of your gloves refused to forget the cold. The sign means, first lift tested, joints content, no surprise in the gear. You wipe the slate once with the side of your hand, so the note becomes a promise to write it properly later. Now, the lower guide. You crouch, knees greeting the planking, and inspect the fair lead where fibers meet an edge they do not admire. Your knife tip teases lint from the corner. You offer the spot a small phrase under your breath that is not quite a blessing and not quite a scolding. The rope accepts both. You straighten and stretch until one quiet vertebra remembers its duty. You visit your cabinet of harmless hoards, cotter pins lined like little fish, a pewter cup of nails in 3 sizes, a folded cloth packet with 2 needles and a coil of waxed thread. A lump of chalk wrapped in paper. The chalk finds the underside of the beam where you keep track of chores already done. And you add a neat line. Outside, mist lifts its hem. Water shows more pewter and less mystery. On the quay opposite, someone beats a rug in a rhythm so steady, you begin to feel the bridge take it in. You run the back of your knuckles along the railing's edge to find the burr you noted last week. It still holds, still rough, still promising to catch a sleeve one careless afternoon. You mark its place with a tiny cross and promise it the file before noon. You end where you began. The lever, the latch, the rope. Your hand rests on the handle, and the bridge is a creature under your palm wood and iron, and the stubborn patience that makes both work. You breathe the smell of wet planks and cold metal and a small stove somewhere, considering its future. You let the breath out and feel the mechanism mirror you in its own slower way. The span is ready to be commanded, which is another way of saying it is ready to be left alone until it is needed. Across the water, a skipper raises a hand the size of a small oar to ask a question you will answer soon enough. For the moment, you close the ledger with the quiet finality of a door that fits its frame, and you let the minute pass without a task in it. Your work is to prepare for work, and also to be the sort of person who can wait for it. The rope keeps your fingerprints. The lever remembers your grip. The day arranges itself around both. You take the ledger down with both hands because it prefers respect in the morning. The covers are board and cloth, softened by years of being open to the same light. The edges smell faintly of dust and ink and old stove smoke, as if they kept their own weather between the pages. You set it on the window shelf, where gray daylight makes a quiet table of the sill. The city beyond is still mostly suggestion. The book is not. Columns, already ruled in a careful brown, wait like empty streets. At the top, your neat headings repeat the day's little truths. Hour, wind, water, vessel, cargo, direction, remarks. Each word has learned to be sensible. You sharpen your pencil with the patience of someone who believes in good beginnings. The curl falls in one soft ribbon, and your thumb rubs the lead to a reliable point. The pencil is ordinary, and therefore a friend. You start with the water, because the water starts everyone. The gauge board down the piling gives you its striped sermon. You lean out where the sill allows, and squint through the mist. The black marks sit on the wet wood like a staff's notes. A ripple lifts the world one small measure higher, and then sets it down again. You read the level with the same attention you would give a whispered name. You write the number without fuss. When next, you open the upper window a thumb's width and ask the air to identify itself. It smells of river and peat and someone's morning bread. The scarf of fog pushes soft on your cheek, and you call it a mild south, a suggestion more than a declaration. You note it in a script that refuses to hurry. S by E, modest. The remark is not for poetry. It is for accuracy disguised as understatement. You turn to the hour and allow the bell to do the work for you. The far tower gives its counted strokes. The small watch in your pocket agrees by a reluctance that amuses you. You set the number in the proper box. Time behaves. That alone seems worth the line it receives. Below that, an opening for remarks waits like a small plate asking for bread. You offer it what you have. Fog persists, no ice yet. First barge timber. It looks fed. The pencil makes a comforting rasp across the paper, a dry whisper that calls attention to itself without apology. You pause between lines long enough to look past the page at the canal. The reflections are overworked watercolors gable. Chimney, the thin slice of a mast dragged slightly out of true by a light current. You do not mind when an image admits it is an image. You prefer honest blur to dishonest clarity. Under the ledger's ribbon lies a folded scrap where you keep the day's small counts that do not deserve the honor of a column. Pigeons harassed by gulls, 3. Boys daring the edge, none so far. Unhelpful advice from passers-by, not yet. You make a dot next to the last item to indicate inevitability. Paper is generous to all sorts of truth, even trivial ones. The book permits your small economy of jokes. You turn to the chart pasted inside the back cover, a simple table of average levels by season, and the useful remarks of your predecessor in a hand wider than yours. December usually steady. January sees illusions. February lies, especially after thaw. You have not tried to improve his wisdom, only to verify it. When the city freezes and people try to be butterflies on skates, you will add your own line about the optimism of boots. The ink bottle sits to one side like a pond thinking private thoughts. You prefer its reliability for signatures and final notes. You wet the nib, tap twice, and the first brown shines on the page with the promise of becoming memory instead of accident. The smell is iron and tannin, a little like a damp barrel. Letters flow in their practiced shapes, thin up, generous down until the paper asks for the blotter. You oblige with a sheet worn soft by yesterday's news. You catalog the first passerby who requires record. A handcart stacked with narrow crates, the useful kind that always seem to be either empty or full without warning. No opening needed, no span disturbed, only the rhythm of wheels walking their way along the quay. You write it anyway, because a city is made of things that do not demand bridges as much as of things that do. The ledger forgives your thoroughness by agreeing to hold it. Your chair, a modest veteran, knows when you lean in with more attention. You draw a light line under the hour to separate practical notes from the small drift of observation that you permit yourself to resemble tidiness. On mornings like this, when fog insists on being the main character, the line keeps your thoughts from becoming too interested in themselves. You prefer the discipline of boxes to the luxury of paragraphs, except when a paragraph disguises itself as a box. You add a small character to the margin that no one else would recognize. It began as a decorative flourish and turned into a code for your future self. It means remember to check the far hinge after noon. The near pin has been in a mood. Oil the latch last. Mind the burr you marked. Your future self will thank you without remembering why. This pleases you as much as anything. A breath of movement across the water informs you that someone has opened a door you cannot see. The faintest sound of spoon and cup reaches your window and goes about its business. You pencil in a tidy pair of zeros in the opening column, no lifts demanded this quarter hour, and put a small dot after them in the remarks. The dot that has become your personal definition of peace. When the work is to wait, the dot proves you did it. You check the book's ribbon, slide it down a page or two to make turning easier later, and rub the edge between forefinger and thumb. Fabric remembers its purpose. It returns to the center, as if drawn by rope logic. You add the date again in the lower margin, not because you need to, but because it satisfies the square of space there. You are taught that empty corners invite trouble. The corners take the hint and behave. Across the canal, the mist thins enough for color to decide to exist. A shutter wears red the way a blush wears a cheek. Brick shows the memory of fires it never saw. A boy appears again with an empty basket and a hat too big for him. The hat insists on opinions about wind. You sign your name at the bottom of the page the way you always sign it. Readable, modest, committed, and the ink dries into history so plain no one would suspect it is new. The ledger closes with the small thud of completion, a note that feels like an approving hand on the work's shoulder. You stand, not because standing is necessary, but because the body likes to reward itself with position changes. The bridge waits. The rope thinks its quiet rope thoughts. The counterweight rehearses silence. You put the book back on its shelf, as carefully as if it might sleep there, which in a way it does. You attend to the stove the way you greet a small, dignified animal that has decided you are acceptable. The iron box sits a little proud on its 3 legs, pretending to be furniture while keeping its secret. It is a controlled volcano, and you are its weather. You open the door. The hinge gives a civil creak that sounds like a nod. Yesterday's ash-light gray, fine as flour, has settled in the pan. You slide it out with 2 careful hands, because even yesterday deserves manners. Ash goes to the bucket. The bucket goes to the corner. The corner promises to become a sweep later. Later agrees to wait. Along the wall, Pete lives in squat brown bricks, a tidy library of summers you never attended. You choose 3, 1 stout, 1 modest, 1 with the ragged edge that always catches first. You stitch them together with shavings and a twist of saved paper. The arrangement is less a stack than a quiet understanding. A match brightens into a bead of bravery. Fire takes the shavings politely, then grows confident enough to persuade the peat. The smell, the very old breath of plants that learned patience, slips into the room and tells your shoulders to stop pretending they are ice. Draft is a negotiator, so you treat it like one. Damper half open to begin. The pipe tests your decision with a thin line of smoke, then accepts the terms and draws clean. You set the iron lid, it learns to tick, a small warm metronome for the room. The trivet receives the kettle with a mild ring, the way a bell might answer a greeting if it were shy. Water from the covered jug pours as one clear thought into the belly of the kettle. You wipe a bead from the spout because beads like to become mischief. The lid seats. The kettle remembers its work. The room begins to smell less like night. You open the tin of chicory. The hinge makes the tiny click that always declares the day official. Grounds sit dark as damp soil. You measure by the habit you inherited without ceremony. A rounded spoon for waking, a narrow one for continuing, a pinch if the fog has opinions. Earthy scent rises with a note of something politely bitter. Honest in the way a ledger is honest. You do not ask it to be what it is not. You ask it to keep you useful, and it nods in its way. The kettle trembles before it speaks. You tilt, wetting the ground slowly, tracing a neat circle that satisfies a private instinct for order. The bloom rises with a sigh and settles as if it had simply stood up to stretch. A ribbon of steam walks to the window and tries a conversation with the fog outside. The fog replies by being generous about boundaries. You cover the pot, let time choose its own slow gait, and resist the idea of counting. While the brew considers its future, you warm the cup. Tin remembers last winter in its bones. Hot water teaches it a kinder lesson. You empty the cup onto the sill and watch a pale thread of steam lift into gray air, a little banner announcing the room's first promotion of the day. When the coffee arrives, the cup behaves as if it has always belonged to this task. You do not add anything. The point is not decoration. The point is steadiness. Heat moves outward from the stove in patient paragraphs. First your hands feel it, then your wrists, then the small foolish gap where sleeve ends and glove begins. The stove's breath is soft and even underneath the larger quiet of the canal. You move your chair closer by the kind of measure carpenters approve of one handspan than another. Knees stop arguing with the morning. The cup sits in your palms like a tame planet. Your first sip is politely stern. Your second becomes instruction. Continue as you were, only warmer. Condensation arranges itself on the window. Droplets gather, consult, merge, travel. Each path collects tiny evidence soot dust. A wool thread, yesterday's fingerprint softened into modesty. One drop stalls at the crossbar as if thinking, then continues with the calm of someone who knows the streets. Outside, something coughs the way pipes cough. Water touches wood below with a sound like advice that arrived early. Your spoon tries to stand in the cup and reconsiders without drama. You take bread from its cloth, cut slices thin enough to agree with the hour, and give the butter the lecture it expects. Persuade, do not overwhelm. A folded paper of herring makes its own case, salt correcting the fog. Bite, sip, breathe, repeat. The cadence suits the day. Crumbs travel toward the ledger. You redirect them with one finger to the plate, because numbers like clean company. When the cup's rim cools to almost friendly, you hold it a little closer to the stove, and the stove pretends not to notice your dependence. The damper appreciates attention without fuss. A finger's breadth more air. The flame answers by becoming practical rather than showy. Somewhere in the pipe, iron ticks in contentment. You shake a patient soft tap of ash from the matchbox and return it to its shelf where the little empire of order lives. Rag folded to the clean side. Oil tin lined up with a wick trimmer. Spare pin pointing north, merely because it always has. Lean back, you tell the chair, and the chair accepts because it has been persuaded into this shape by a long friendship with gravity. The floor's planks run toward the hinge pin with the thoughtful purpose of narrow rivers. Steam fogs your spectacles briefly. The world softens into kindness, then clears as though it didn't mean to be sentimental. You consider the term idleness, decide it is inaccurate, and choose the better phrase, temperature management. The city is beginning its recital beyond the door. Hoof, wheel, shoe, voice, each instrument warming up, none yet in a hurry. A mother tells a child something definitive. The child replies with untroubled certainty. Both are probably right. Your cup has reached the point where conversation suits it better than heat, so you accommodate it with a slower sip. Grounds on the bottom offer a map of places you will not go today. Brown archipelagos, a narrow channel. a shoal. You let them remain untroubled. You have boats of your own to mind, cup upside down to dry, ring wiped from the sill by a thumb that recognizes its job, cloth folded and set back to its square. The room agrees to be itself. Heat has been distributed into the parts of you that like to complain. Those parts rethink their policy. You set the damper to a slightly lazier angle. The fire accepts leadership when it is polite. A beam on the ceiling receives your small chalk mark. That means stove tended, kettle ready, no amendments required. Stand and nothing cracks. Shoulder, elbow, wrist. Spine like rope under mild tension. Knees that bear no grudge now that warmth has spoken. The span waits outside with its dignified patience. The lever rehearses silence. The rope, impressed by nobody, keeps its counsel. You set the kettle to one side for later and return the chicory tin to its corner with the lid facing left. Because all lids face left here, and the rule has never failed you. You touch the stove door once more, not to adjust, simply to confirm the alliance. The hinge gives a courteous whisper. The ashpan is clean. The trivet sits square. The kettle rests like a good idea saved for the afternoon. The room holds the kind of warmth that never boasts. You lift the ledger. The cloth feels different now that the air has agreed to be merciful. You think the small thought that repeats itself under all the others. You are ready to lift, to lower, to note, to nod. The cup is empty. The day is not. And the bridge, which admires steady people more than clever ones, expresses its approval by doing absolutely nothing. The rush does not begin with noise. It begins with intention arriving from several directions at once. You feel it first in the rope before you see it, in the way the canal's surface gathers little arrows and sends them downstream. You stand at the lever and look along the water's long hallway. Shapes declare themselves, low barges under tarpaulins dark as soaked bark. A skiff with two men and a question. A squat tug shouldering air, as if air were something to move. The morning has decided that you will be needed, and obliging as ever, you agree. Signals arrive in the old grammar of hands and hats and patience. The first skipper shows a flat palm held low, the sign that means, I am close. I will not dawdle. Help me keep my promise to time. You raise your chin in the answer that says, I see you. The hinge will behave. You lift the latch. The metal answers with its agreeable click. Shoulder, elbow, wrist, and grip line up like good soldiers who dislike ceremony. The lever begins its arc. The span remembers the mechanics of rising, and the counterweight in its house clears its throat and proceeds without fuss. Timber passes first. The smell of forest, disciplined into rectangles. The barge's bow wears old paint that insists on being both green and brown, depending on which memory you ask it to keep. The men aboard keep their voices low, spending them only on necessary syllables. You admire their ballast of silence. One taps the brim of his cap to thank you without asking for your name. You return the smallest nod because anything larger would be inaccurate. Behind the load, a wake writes a single cursive line across the pewter, and then the canal smooths the sentence flat again. You lower the span with the care of someone placing a sleeping child back into a cradle. The planks meet their housings with the soft, specific thud you wait for. The sound that proves the day intends to be reasonable. Before the latch can grow lonely, another signal appears. Two fingers traced in a careful circle. I will turn beneath you. Keep the world steady. You oblige by holding the lever at the balance point, where the bridge is neither here nor there, suspended in the modest theater of halfway. The skiff goes through at an angle learned from years, or dipping just enough to avoid saying too much to the current. A boat with crates presents itself next, the kind of cargo that smells of earth and orange peel, and the dust of distant straw. The skipper leans into his pole with the stubborn grace of someone who has asked the water for many favors and received them in due time. You raise, you permit, you lower. The motions are ordinary enough to be a lullaby, and yet each one insists on the attention that keeps ordinary from turning careless. Your hands perform the same notes. The music changes with each hull and each mind at the tiller. Between lifts, you chalk the slate ticks for passages, small triangles for vessels that wanted more room than they admitted, a tidy dot when someone attempted advice and then thought better of it. Your marks are private, but they make the pattern visible at a glance. The ledger will receive the dignified version later. The slate tolerates your shorthand now. A crumb of bread, dislodged by usefulness, attends the edge of the chalk and tries to be counted. You brush it to the floor and promise it no further mathematics. A tug pushing 2 barges announces itself in a voice one size too large for the canal. Soot curls from its funnel and makes a brief sky of its own beneath the broader, kinder one that belongs to everyone. You prepare yourself not for force, but for steadiness. The lever requires no heroics, only insistence without haste. Wood aligns, iron agrees, rope obeys, and you become the quiet sum of these agreements. The tug's master lifts 2 fingers at the height of his cheek, a salute that says the 2 of you are professionals and need no speeches. When the tug has gone and the ripples have argued themselves calm, you breathe in the leftover heat of effort and find it satisfactory. The world resumes its smaller scale. A woman crosses the bridge with a basket and thanks you for nothing, which is correct, because she did not have to pause. You prefer gratitude in the form of not being necessary. The gull inspects the railing for a miracle and does not find one. The cat rolls onto one hip and tests the idea that drowsiness can be taught by example. Another barge noses into the picture. This one stacked with brick, each unit an argument about weight and promise. You can smell clay even at this distance, a dry, flat scent that makes a point without raising its voice. The skipper indicates a small delay with the tilt of his hand. Someone at the bow unties a knot that decided to express personality. You wait, because waiting is part of moving. When the hand straightens, you lift again. The rope hums a low agreement. The hinge takes your weight the way an old friend takes news, calmly, with interest but without alarm. Over the next quarter hour, the pattern becomes a gentle pulse. Raise, hold, lower, note, nod, forget. Things that could have become difficulties choose not to. A child on a deck is reminded by an ant that decks are still floors. A mast finial remembers not to test your beam. A coil of line chooses not to discover your lever. You receive these mercies with professional humility. The bridgehouse window fogs from the kettle's quiet industry, and then clears again, as though practicing empathy. You notice how each hull writes its brief letter on the water and how the current reads it, sometimes politely, sometimes with editorial flourish. Peat-laden barges leave a slower script. Cheese boats scrawl briskly. Vessels with nothing but future promises aboard make a light, careless stroke that the wind edits for them. You could stand here all day and learn the alphabet of wakes, and in fact you do, across many days, and it is enough. You record a tidy pair of ticks on the slate, and then wipe your finger across the board to show the quarter hour a little kindness. A skiff returns against the grain and asks for indulgence with a raised oar. You hold the span just shy of settled, granting it a shade more headroom than necessary, because generosity costs nothing when measured in inches. The oar dips in salute. Water knuckles under the blade and then forgets it was disturbed. Your hand rests on the lever until wood, iron, and rope stop thinking about one another and resume merely being themselves. You lower the last inch with the same care given to the first. When the rush begins to relax, the canal returns to its default sentence, a long, mild clause with many commas and no need of exclamation. You set the lever home and make one last chalk mark, a little cross that means no quarrels, several courtesies, a decent morning. You clear a flake from the latch's bed with the corner of your nail, then let your hand rest on the wood because it is good wood and it has permitted you to look competent again. Competence is pleasant. Not being found out by the day is more pleasant still. You take a sip from the cup that has gone modestly cool and find that it suits the quieter water. Across the way, a boy sits on a bollard and practices being the kind of person who will someday wave at a bridge and expect it to rise. You wish him many non-events and 1 or 2 instructive lessons that bruise only pride. A bell tests the next quarter hour, clearing its throat before it sings. You answer by looking down the canal again, because this is the only answer you have ever needed. You keep the almanac between the ledger and the oil tin, not because it belongs there, but because those neighbors teach it manners. The cover is blue, gone to gray. Cloth, rubbed to a polite shine where thumbs have lived. A year is stamped in tired gold. The numbers still try to look important. You open to the ribbon and find the month sitting with its hat off. Columns march in tidy ranks. Moon, sun, tide, wind, odds and ends. They do not make promises. They merely stand ready to be consulted, which is all any book can honestly do. You slide the chair so the window lends its better light. Fog has thinned enough that the page accepts letters without sulking. Ink on coarse paper looks like well-behaved soot. A little woodcut of a crescent moon smiles at nothing in particular. You admire its commitment to cheerfulness. The table gives you sunrise by minutes, sunset by minutes, and the exact point at which day decides to pretend it is longer or shorter. You have learned not to argue. The sun does what it prefers. Your job is to write neatly and be ready. Moon phase receives a private nod. On nights when the city chooses reflection over sleep, you like to know whether the span will want its lantern earlier than habit suggests. You trace dates with one finger and feel the brittle give of paper that has decided to become permanent. In the margin, an earlier hand warns of stronger currents near the new moon, underlined twice as if the water can read. You keep the warning because it costs nothing to remember what someone else chose to worry about. And sometimes worry is merely experience speaking with a hat on. Wind has a column too, though no honest book swears it will blow as printed. A small rose, 8 points, tries to place the world on a compass. Beside it, a proverb announces that a south wind brings stories and a north wind brings chores. You consider this and decide the book is more poet than prophet. Still, you run a finger from S to E and think of the way fog uses those roads. You add a private mark next to days that predict patience and write nothing next to days that predict hurry. Experience suggests hurry does not need encouragement. Tide deserves attention even this far inland, because locks, sluices, and men who think in water keep their own schedules, and your bridge cooperates with all of them. The almanac names hours as if it had spoken to the sea over breakfast. Your pencil makes modest dots next to climbs, and smaller dots next to falls. The dots mean, remember the tug's moods. Remember that barges grow ambitious when the world helps them. You do not worship the table. You keep it like a weather glass, useful, respectable, inclined to be right often enough to save you from opinions. Odds and ends are the book's favorite habit. Saints' days share a line with market notices, and both must squeeze to make room for a reminder about chimney sweeping in February. A tiny recipe promises relief for chilblains that require snow, salt, and good behavior. You have tried 2 of those with mixed results. A list of eclipses occupies a proud square of type, each event announced like a visiting dignitary. You smile at the formality. The moon will do its trick whether or not your bridge approves, and that is a comfortable truth. You rest the page flat with 2 fingers, one at each corner, the way you hold a plank so it remembers to stay true. From outside, a voice carries the indisputable news that someone's dog has opinions. You let the sound pass through the almanac and out the other side, without disturbing the arithmetic. The kettle lifts a shoulder of steam. You promise it attention soon. For now, numbers deserve the small ceremony of being believed long enough to be useful. Belief here is not permanent. It is a temporary loan that you will repay with a neat line in the remarks. You permit yourself a small inventory of weather signs the book has taught you, and you have adjusted. When stovepipe smoke goes straight up, someone will ask whether you can see Greenland. Answer by tightening your scarf. When swallows write fast near the surface, expect advice from men who have never lifted a lever. When cloud sits low on gables like a cap that refuses to take a hint, count on a day that prefers conversation to distance. None of these are official. All are serviceable. The almanac does not scold you for adding a footnote in the margin that reads simply, use sense. Your pencil finds the edge where you keep the bridge's private calendar. Symbols mark visits you expect. The coal scow belonging to the man who is late even when he is early. The cheese boat that favors Wednesdays because the monger likes a particular stall. The tug that talks louder than it needs to and apologizes afterward. You pretend to plan around them and then merely remain ready, which is the more honest plan. The page grows a constellation of dots and tiny arrows only you can read, and that is enough. The book gives the moon's rising not only by hour, but by degree, which reads like theater seating for the sky. Low, higher, higher still. You look up through the window and imagine the arch of it behind the fog. a geometry insisting the canal is part of something that does not care about silt. The thought is both comforting and practical. It turns the day from a list into a line. Lines can be followed without fretting. Lists have a way of nagging. A woodcut near the bottom shows a man examining a weather glass with the expression of someone listening to a sermon he requested. You have no weather glass, only a good nose and ears that have learned to weigh distance. Still, the picture pleases you. A blackbird on the sill approves with a tilt of its head, then makes the professional decision to be somewhere else. You note the stove's appetite in damp weather, and turn the page with the same care you give the latch, enough to show respect, not enough to be dramatic. The paper rasps softly under your hand. The sound could be rain a street away. A fold at the corner remembers last autumn. You smooth it, and it agrees to live in the new season. The ribbon keeps pace without tangling, an employee that has learned your ways. You find the leaf you pressed months ago when bridges were the second thing on everyone's mind after heat. It has settled into the color of a respectable shoe and will not cause trouble again. You leave it where it can continue to be harmless. A bell counts the quarter. You write its number in the ledger and return to the almanac as if you had only blinked. The canal offers a low cluck beneath the board's wood, adjusting to weather, or water remembering to be amused. You decide the book has bought exactly 10 calm minutes. 10 minutes can hold a county's worth of thoughts if you keep them simple. You keep them simple. Wind from the south is a guest. Wind from the north is a supervisor. Fog is furniture. Rain is commentary. Ice is law. You close the almanac gently and balance it on your palm as you stand. An old ritual you invented the day you almost dropped it into the canal and decided to rehearse care. The cover receives your hand's warmth and offers nothing back but texture. The ribbon lies flat. The year on the spine promises to end only once. You slide the book into its place between ledger and oil tin, where practical ink will keep it grounded, and practical grease will remind it not to be precious. Outside, a barge makes its case at a distance with the exact note your ear knows. The lever waits. The rope, shy as ever, declines to volunteer but will obey when asked. You give the month's neat grid one last look and feel the way its squares turn hours into rooms where work can live without rushing. The kettle whispers. The fog allows a little color into the day as if tipping its hat. You answer with the small nod your bridge understands. Ready. You choose a piece of driftwood from the little pile beside the stove. Not the straightest, and not the most handsome one that feels agreeable in the hand. Pale, light, and softened by water, its grain reads like a quiet map. You tap it once on the sill to hear its mood, then sit by the window where steady light keeps you honest. The knife opens with a small, respectful click. The wood answers by being willing. The first shaving is a ribbon that remembers being tree and decides to be curl instead. It falls onto your boot in a slow spiral and does not object when you brush it aside. You square the end for form's sake and then round it until the corners forget they were ever important. No hurry, no heroics, only pressure that matches grain. Your thumb steadies the knife's back. Your other hand turns the wood like a mild planet. You aim for an oval that narrows toward a polite tip. Enough volume to float, enough taper to read at a glance. You do not need another float, strictly speaking. You make one anyway because making is a way of waiting that does not trouble the clock. On the railing, a gull performs indifference. You decline to be interviewed. The canal cat blinks once to approve the craftsmanship and resumes his nap without filing a report. The grain suggests direction and you consent, shaving across when it permits and with it when it insists. A knot appears a small, patient eye. You work around it and leave a freckle that will help you find this piece later among its cousins. The knife's spine warms beneath your thumb. The edge stays cool and honest. Shavings gather on your knee like pale handwriting and then slide to the floor when the pile becomes vain. Between passes, you let your ear check the canal. Reflections breathe evenly under the planks. No hat lifts, no pole signals urgency. The rope gives no opinion, which is its preferred state. You return to the piece and nick a shallow groove round the waist where the line will sit obediently. The blade whispers. A grain of dust lands on your sleeve and pretends to be important until you send it away. You test the float in the water pail by the door. It rides a shade high, cheerful but not smug. You press it under with one finger, and let it return at its own pace. It tilts the same way twice, which is the wood asking for balance. You mark the heavy side with your thumb and take a sliver so thin it might be breath. Back in the pail, the oval sits level and seems pleased with the arrangement. From the shelf, you fetch last winter's Brave Red in a corked vial. You shake it as you would wake a polite sleeper and give each tip a pinhead dot clarity, not decoration. The red looks good against the pail, as if it remembers lantern glass and brick warmed by evening. You set the float on the sill so the draft will persuade the paint to settle. Then touch the knife with an oiled rag, because tools prefer attention before complaint. A scrap of cork becomes a collar for the near end, less for need than for kindness to fingers when the line is cold. The awl finds its center without theatrics. You feed the line from its peg through the new groove. It lays itself along the wood with the pride of ribbon finding the right coat. A modest half-hitch agrees to hold without boasting. The coil that remains gets wound with the nicer side outward. Order likes being invited. Outside, a skiff decides to be a boat rather than a question. Two men discuss patience in the dialect of poles and current. The canal, pleased, does most of the work. You stand and roll your shoulders in a small circle that keeps the day friendly to joints. The finished float joins its cousins in the box, near the ledger, where it will become a number tonight and perhaps a story later. For now, it is inventory, which is a comfortable fate. You sweep the shavings into your palm and hold them a moment, because they look like an idea that changed its mind. Window light turns the curls into a tiny theater lines from the tree's years made into thread. You tip them into the stove. The fire performs its quiet trick, and the room learns a warmer sentence. On the sill, the red dries without drama. On the water, a reflection moves one plank's width and then another. Your hands are clean, your pocket knife asleep, and the lever is exactly where you left it, ready when you are. You choose the oiling hour when the canal sounds like someone reading softly to themselves. The rush has stepped aside. Ripples fold into a quiet that feels cooperative. You gather your small kit from its shelf. The tin of oil with a dent that helps your thumb remember where to press. The tallow in a wrapped paper, like a modest pastry. The rag that has served so long it knows the names of the parts. And the thin brush with hairs that remain loyal despite their age. The chain greets you first, because chains do not write complaints, they simply report in sound. You lift the guard and find the links sitting with their bright mouths turned inward, small crescents polished by the same patient meeting again and again. You tip the can until a single bead forms, then lay it along the run where iron kisses iron. The bead lengthens into a line, then divides itself dutifully. You move the lever a breath, the chain walks, new mouths arrive. You offer each the same quiet favor. The smell of oil is clean and faintly nut-like, a scent that agrees with iron and old wood. The rag takes the extra and leaves a dull shine that catches the window light in modest flashes. You listen, because listening tells you what to do next. The dry note softens into a murmur. The murmur settles toward agreement. You think of the chain as a choir that prefers to be tuned rather than praised. Now, the hinge pins. You crouch where the boards know your knees and lay one fingertip on the iron to ask whether it remembers yesterday's weather. Cool but not sulking. A tiny brushful goes to the seam where round turns inside round. You turn the lever through a small arc and watch the shine draw itself thin, a silver thread disappearing into work. The hinge answers in syllables, first a polite clear throat, then a hum that means keep doing what you are doing. You warm the tallow between thumb and forefinger until it behaves, then feed a whisper of it to the latch tongue, and it's bed. The metal accepts the fat the way hands accept lotion in winter, without applause, with relief. You move the latch up and down, feeling for grit, waiting for that single clean click that announces correctness without bragging. It arrives, not louder, only more sure of itself. You return the handle to rest and let it be pleased. Up to the counterweight house. The little door gives a familiar scrape that you note for later attention. Inside, the block sits among its timbers like a heavy thought in good company. You touch each bolt head with the back of your knuckle, cool, firm, uninteresting in the best sense. Where the rope sweeps over the sheave, a faint line of dust suggests yesterday's industry. You brush it away with the soft part of the rag and give the axle a single measured drop. The wheel answers by deciding not to be noticed. Back on the deck, you attend to the guide pulleys that keep the line honest as it travels. They are small and eager to be forgotten, which is exactly why you do not forget them. One turns reluctantly. You coax it with the brush and a patient hand on the rim until it remembers its manners. It spins once, as if to show off, then resumes dignity. You nod as if at a child who has put a hat on straight after several opinions. The railing earns its share. Your palm finds the burr you marked earlier. The file makes 3 quiet strokes, nothing more, and the roughness loses heart. A dab of oil under the cap screws discourages rust from composing letters. You wipe each place you have touched, because too much care can become its own kind of grit. The rag darkens, the iron brightens, the day approves. Between tasks, you let the canal inform you. A tug mutters somewhere out of sight, and then decides to take its noise elsewhere. A pair of ducks consults the eddies and arrives at a conclusion only they understand. The bridge holds its breath the way a good listener does, alert, unintrusive, ready. You take a sip from the cup on the sill and find it cooler than ambition and perfect for the work at hand. You set a small chalk mark on the beam above 2 short lines that mean chain, hinge, latch completed. The marks comfort you not because they are necessary, but because they keep the mind from inventing errands it does not need. The brush returns to its tin with a light tap. The oil lid twists home until the dent meets your thumb. The paper goes back around the tallow with the clean side out. Tools like being put away as if tomorrow will really happen. A last walk of the lever. Down an inch, hold it balance, up a breath, rest. The mechanism follows like a horse that knows your hands. No chatter, no argument, only a firm exchange of weight and intention. The sound in the room alters by a shade you would miss if you had not made it yourself less rasp, more purr. A conversation improved by a drop of kindness. You allow yourself the brief satisfaction of a job that reveals itself not in appearance, but in absence. Nothing grates, nothing stalls, nothing complains. You wipe your hands and then, because the rag has earned dignity, fold it along its cleaner stripe. The shelf accepts each piece of the kit in its old order. Outside, a barge makes itself large at the bend, and a hat lifts in a question you understand in the bones. You place one palm on the lever and feel the answer waiting there, quiet and ready, the bridge having decided, for another stretch of hours, to be agreeable. You take the slate from its nail by the window, the one with the corner worn smooth where hands have thought about other things. Chalk waits in a paper twist beside the ledger, quiet as salt. You pick the shorter stick because it minds its own business. The slate likes order, so you draw the day's small fence. 4 narrow pins, peat, brick, cheese, beer, and a skinny paddock for the creatures that do not fit inside names. Each title is a single letter you can read at a distance. The chalk leaves a soft, trusting line and dusts your fingertips with a pale veil that says you are doing work even when no one can hear it. The first mark arrives with the first barge of peat. You give it a vertical stroke 1, then another when the next bundle rides past under canvas dark with old rain. A third comes, slower, and you add the stroke without ceremony. The fourth, you draw slightly longer because it felt like a small effort on the lever. There is no science to that. It simply pleases you. After the fifth, you draw the small crossbar that gathers the others into a family. 5 looks more finished than 4. It reassures the eye that groups are possible. Brick gets squares instead of ticks. You stack them in pairs, a private joke that the clay would appreciate if clay understood arranging. The barge master tips his cap. You answer by making your neat little box. Cheese earns circles, round and modest as its wheels. Beer receives short dashes that slant forward, eager to be drunk by the end of the day. In the far column you place a dot when something odd passes, empty hull traveling like a thought, a skiff overconfident, a boat whose cargo is none of your business and everyone's business at once. Chalk has a sound that only close ears hear. It hisses when you are decisive and whispers when you are merely continuing. Sometimes it squeaks to remind you that the hand is too flat. You tilt and it forgives you. The dust gathers in a fine line along the slate's lower edge. You wipe it with the side of your glove, and the glove becomes a ledger of its own, pale where counts have been made. Your pocket carries a square of soft rag for the small mistakes that refuse to live with their neighbors. The rag takes them away without gossip. Between openings, you glance and add. Glance and add an economy of thought you learned from mornings like this. A tug clears its throat around the bend. A cheese boat follows dutifully. You lift, you lower, you circle once on the slate. The circle is not quite round. You resist the urge to fix it. Perfection wastes time that will be needed later for reality. A boy on the quay plays a private game with cobbles, hopping only the darker ones. You add a tick for Pete and pretend you are not doing the same. Soon the slate begins to speak in pattern. Bricks climb their quiet stair. Beer slashes forward 3 at a time. Cheese rounds itself contentedly. You stand back the width of a palm, and the day resolves into 4 small stories told without adjectives. This pleases you almost as much as a clear latch. The window light deepens and the chalk's white brightens. It is a fair trade. The canal approves by not arguing with the planks. You add a dot to the far column because a gull has stolen a bark from a dog and is flying away with it, which feels like commerce of a sort. When your hand grows too certain, you change it. You switch the chalk to the other fingers and let the lines become a fraction less tidy. Tidy is for the ledger. The slate is for living. A man leans from astern and asks a question with a hand too far away to hear. You answer by holding the lever at balance, which is the kind of grammar everyone speaks. Then you lay another dash in the beer pen and a small box in brick, and the chalk dust breathes from the slate when you blow on it, making a small weather of your own. You try not to count ahead, but the eye will do what it likes. When Pete stands at 9, you know the next will make a neat bundle. When Cheese sits at 7, you expect 2 boats you do not yet see. The mind prepares small satisfactions like biscuits for a pocket. A skiff slips through with nothing aboard except a mood. You mark the mood with the tiniest dot in the odd column and watch it please itself by being unnoticed. By noon, the fence of pens has grown crowded. You draw a horizontal rule and begin again beneath it, a new pasture for the afternoon herd. The first set will feed the ledger later. The second set will test your memory for which boats pretended not to need help and which admitted it. Chalk nubs down to a brave grain. You press it into the longer stick, pinch them together, and carry on as if continuity were the simplest trick you know. Sometimes a stroke stands too tall. You shorten the next to even the view. Sometimes a circle looks asleep. You give the next a little lean. This has no meaning, and yet it helps. The eye likes its chores to appear conversational. A breeze finds the window. The slate cools under your hand. You wipe the ledge with the folded edge of the rag so the chalk dust doesn't turn to paste when fog returns with an opinion. Practical, unglamorous gestures your bridge prefers these, and so do you. Late in the hour, you check the tally against your pocket sense of the morning. Pete 5 and 5, Brick 6 boxes and a half, grown 7th, Cheese 9 rounds, and an ambitious 10th approaching. Beer 11 dashes with more to come because people are people. The far column holds 3 dots and a tiny triangle for crate of uncertain fruit, which seems both accurate and kind. You let the numbers stand without commentary. They are not achievements, they are footprints. You return the slate to its nail when the next call for the lever arrives, because the lever outranks everyone. The chalk rests, the dust settles, the day continues. Your hand keeps the faint white memory of marking. You leave it there. It reminds you that some work ends in a book and some work ends in air, and both are worth doing so long as they make the bridge agreeable and the canal untroubled. You add one last neat tick for Pete on your way past, just to keep the columns friendly, and the squeak it makes is exactly the right size. You hear them before you see them, the soft shuffled consonants of pigeons along the roof, the confident vowel of a gull, the near-silent paragraph of the canal cat landing from a windowsill. You break the heel from yesterday's loaf and consider distribution like a mild official with a very small jurisdiction. Crumbs become policy. The sill becomes a square. Patience does the announcements. The pigeons arrive first, obedient to the rumor of bread. They tilt their necks as if checking that the morning has kept its appointments. Colors live quietly. Oil greens, purples, ash grays. Their feet read the planks like braille. Their heads write quick cursive in the air. You pinch off pieces no larger than a thumbnail and set them in a line so the shy ones can pretend they won them by merit. A gull drops from a higher sentence and edits your plan with a beak-like punctuation. It steps forward with the authority of someone who has never bought flour and yet knows all about bread. You accept the lecture by looking elsewhere and becoming interested in knots along the rail. The gull delivers two remarks, the second mostly philosophy, then chooses a corner that allows it to supervise both pigeons and you. The pigeons pretend not to mind. They continue the old dance, 2 steps, nod, peck, 2 steps, nod, reconsider, wings half open to save face. A brave one in slate makes a single democratic bow and takes its share. Another rings like a small bell and startles itself. You allow each to become a tiny event and then an aftermath, the way all mornings are built. The cat introduces himself by not asking permission. He places a paw on the sill and collects warmth from both sides of the glass, as though heat is a currency, and he is fortunate in his investments. Black with a white bib, whiskers disciplined, eyes unbothered by anyone else's priorities, he looks at you long enough to be an inspection and short enough to avoid paperwork. You open the lower pane so the sill becomes common ground. He accepts the promotion. Bread for birds. A fingertip rubbed together for the cat, because cats respect economy. He sniffs your knuckles, approves your brand of human, and sits. The tail arranges itself along the wood like a confident string. You scratch once behind the ear and are rewarded with a purr that sounds like a small hand mill turning rye. In this room, purring is licensed. It explains nothing and improves everything. The gull attempts an opinion about the cat. The cat, fully briefed on gulls, offers a low glance that says opinions should file requisitions. The gull refrains and returns to inventory among the crumbs. A breeze slides a loose feather along the sill like a polite note. You leave it to finish its small journey. You pour a thimble of water into a shallow dish kept for visitors. The pigeons drink, as if practicing for a smaller, more fastidious world. The cat declines, preferring to inspect the meniscus, then to admire the reflection of his own ear. You set another crumb near the hinge and watch an especially careful bird measure the distance in 4 precise steps, stopping at each to consult whatever book pigeons carry inside their heads. It pecks, then looks at you with the dignity of a clerk receiving documents. Between your fingers, a last crust waits. You crumble it finer for the ones who avoid the center. A juvenile, with the awkward geometry of youth skitters, decides and succeeds. Its satisfaction is as large as it can carry, and no larger. The gull offers a final editorial and lifts away, trailing the sort of confidence that comes from sound rather than logic. The air seems quieter afterward, as if the page had been turned. The cat decides the sill is yours again, and steps down onto the plank with the precision of someone docking a boat. He walks a loop that includes the leg of your chair and the corner where the sun has found a sentence to underline. He pauses to consider the bucket, judges it unworthy of pursuit, and returns to your boot to declare a truce with a short, decisive press of his shoulder. You sign by not moving your foot for several breaths. Out on the water, a ripple records the passage of something already around the bend. You listen to its afterthought, and then to the next, the way one listens for footsteps in a building where everyone is neighborly. The pigeons finish their arithmetic and depart by increments, one to the bollard, one to the roof edge, one to the idea of elsewhere. A last feather rolls along the sill until your finger stops it. You lift it and wedge it in the window frame so it stays. The room feels correctly unimportant again. You close the lower pane, not all the way, just enough to make a covenant between inside warm and outside honest. The cat has become a comma on the mat, punctuating the doorway without taking responsibility for the sentence. You brush your hands above the ash bucket and watch the flower of crumbs fall and vanish. Then, you wash them in the basin. You return the loaf to its cloth, fold the cloth, and place it where the stove will think about it without getting bossy. You note in the ledger nothing about birds, only the hour, the weather, and a remark about improved visibility. Some mornings are for data, some for conversation with creatures who do not require verbs. This one, obligingly, has been both. You set the slate straight, stroke the cat once on the way past, and let the bridge resume its uninterrupted patience. Midday arrives without changing its voice. The light does not brighten. It simply admits more texture brick roughening into itself. Rope showing soft hairs. Water trading pewter for a livelier metal. You set the lever home. Make sure the latch is seated like a good thought, and tell yourself the sensible truth. Hunger is another maintenance task. Bread waits in its cloth, the loaf leaning against the tin the way an old friend leans on a doorway. The knife knows the angle. You do not jag at the crust, you persuade it. Slices come in shy, obedient planes. Cheese unwraps from paper with the sigh of a small curtain, pale gold edged in rind. Herring opens from its tin with that saline announcement that rewrites the room. The stove approves. The cat pretends not to. You arrange things on the window shelf because the canal insists on being invited to your table. The cup returns from its post by the stove. You pour the second chicory and accept its stern diplomacy. A slice of bread wears a modest coat of butter and a square of cheese. The next slice takes thin herring with a flick of onion saved in vinegar. You stand while you eat, because sitting would make this a meal, and standing keeps it a pause. Crumbs fall, and you flick the larger ones toward the sill's edge for later diplomacy with pigeons. A breeze lifts the onion's brightness and dilutes the salt to something conversational. You bite, and the three things, bread, cheese, fish, shake hands and agree to behave. The city smells of damp rope and hot iron somewhere out of sight. A cart passes with the rhythm of a metronome that forgot to be strict. Across the canal, a door opens and gives up a man with a broom. He sweeps as if retrieving old promises. A woman rinses a pot beneath a spout and holds it to the light. Two boys argue in pantomime and then forget what they defended. Your lunch includes their gestures. Their day includes your nod. On the water, a scum of sawdust has found companions in 3 leaves and a cork that remembers parties. They turn together like a thoughtful parade. Each bite lowers the parade in your attention, and each sip raises it. Balance is achieved. You do not count mouthfuls, but the body does, keeping its ledger in private. The kettle mutters on the trivet as if repeating a story you already know and are content to hear again. You offer the cat a corner of cheese to prove you are educable. He accepts the principle but not the cheese, preferring the ritual to the substance. He chooses instead to occupy the square of sunlight on the floor with the seriousness of a clerk guarding an inkwell. The gull revisits the topic of crumbs. The crumbs reply by existing. You are surrounded by negotiators. Lunch is the treaty. You inspect the knife edge against the window, approve its honesty, and wrap the cheese with the paper's clean side inward. Bread returns to cloth with the heel tucked like a belt. The tin of herring receives its lid and retires to the box with a dignity out of proportion to its station. Hands dipped in the basin. Towel once, twice. A barge signals a hat lifted briskly. A pole held up like a question. You swallow, set cup and knife aside, and take the lever with a palm still faintly salted. The span rises at the speed of reason. The barge passes with a ripple that pats the planks like an old neighbor. You lower and hear that soft signature thud you could pick out of a crowded room. Lunch never resents a brief intermission. It has the patience of bread. Back to the sill, and the cup now pleasantly cooler. You finish the herring slice because the onion demands fairness. Your gaze rests on the opposite gable long enough to notice the footprint of a removed bracket, the ghost of an earlier contrivance. You add a line to the ledger hour, weather steady, 2 passages, and dot it with the dot that says there will be no story later, which is relief disguised as punctuation. The air has the mild weight that makes people speak closer to the size of their thoughts. A bell keeps its quarter appointment. You fold the cloth, place it in its accustomed corner. The act feels like putting a day back on its shelf. The cat performs a yawn that looks like a theater opening, and then closes the theater promptly for reasons of scheduling. You shake the last crumbs into your palm and scatter them with the diplomatic reach of a long arm through the window. A careful pigeon pretends to be passing through, and then decides that passing through includes pecking. You wash the cup and leave it upside down so you can enjoy the clean circle it will make on the sill. Hunger addressed, you tidy the paws away. Knife wiped, paper folded for one more day, tin aligned, cloth squared, slate rehung, lever checked without moving it. Work resumes not as a new thing, but as the old thing regaining volume. You touch the latch for luck, or for habit, or because touching tools between meals feels like thanks. The canal continues its long sentence with no urgency about the period. A faint sun breaks the fog's argument at last and parks a plane of light on the far wall. You watch dust make a small galaxy, and then stop watching. because the barges are not finished and the afternoon has intentions. You set your hands where they know to be. Right palm on the lever, left hand ready for the latch, mind quiet, stomach agreeable, day sufficient to itself. You pick up the lantern with two hands the way you would lift a sleeping thought gently, with the intention of returning it better than you found it. The brass frame wears fingerprints of other weather. The glass holds a film of breath from nights that needed more light than sense. You set it on the table by the window so daylight can show you what soot prefers to hide. The hinge gives the small permission you ask of it, and the door opens like a mouth about to be practical. The wick has become a scholar of its own ash. You turn the knob until a polite ridge shows. Then trim the margin where ambition has made a ragged thesis. The shears click twice, crisp as good punctuation. The black frill falls and forgets to be a problem. You square the top to a modest crescent. Not too proud, not too shy. A well-behaved flame likes modest geometry. The scent of old paraffin rises with a hint of last week's wind. You pour a measure of oil with the careful hand of someone who has repaired spills that did not need to exist. The funnel hums a tiny note. The reservoir accepts the idea. You stop before the line no one else can see, because lanterns dislike enthusiasm. The cap returns, with threads finding their home on the second try. You wipe the lip and handle all the same, because clean metal outlives most mistakes. Glass first, then brass. This is the order that keeps the rag honest. You let the cloth find its circles. Soot surrenders in gray halos that turn your hand wise. Where fog has left its lace, you chase it with a dry square until the pane remembers transparency. A scratch shows on the lower right like an old anecdote. You leave it. The pane that tells the truth with a scar is a better colleague. You lift the lantern to the window and tilt it until daylight writes along the arcs and corners. Streaks confess, you absolve them with another pass. The metal around the chimney brightens, the dull yellow deepening into patience. You rub the tiny nameplate until its letters stop mumbling. Someone stamped them with pride years ago. It costs nothing to let that pride breathe again. The reflector receives its share, though it keeps its opinions in the background. You remove it and coax a shine from the dim. Your face appears in a warped, polite way, the look of a person agreeing not to be dramatic about light. When it gives back a pale oval without complaint, you set it in place and it pretends you were never there. Before you test the flame, you look to the sky as a formality. Cloud in mild layers, wind with no plan, a sun extracting itself from gauze. Good. The match scrapes the box with the sound of a cricket taking work. Fire takes the wick, as if reminded of an appointment. The flame climbs, then settles, a small dome practicing its manners. You lower the glass and watch a veil of condensation vanish. No flutter, no smoke, just a steady answer. You try the lantern at 3 heights to see where it belongs. On the lower hook, it lights the planks so a boot won't invent a story. On the middle hook, it reads faces softly. On the highest, it speaks to water. The canal, flattered, sends the light back in careful pieces. You choose the middle, because dusk will want company more than consultation. The hook takes the weight with a note like a coin settling. You tend the chimney's cap and its little draft collar, turning each until they volunteer a more generous draw. Flame breathes broader without extravagance. You shadow the lantern with your hand. The light leans but does not falter. A fly circles once, thinks better of literacy, and departs. You approve and continue. Now the seal where glass meets frame. You run a finger along the putty's tired edge and decide it has another season in it. You mark the worst place with a pencil for the list you keep for a day when patience disguises itself as leisure. The hinge pin takes a bead of oil and becomes less interested in conversation. You open, close, the rhythm of reliability, rehearse the way doors prefer. At the window, you try the world through the cleaned pane. The canal looks newly minted. The opposite gable seems to have washed its face. Even the cat notices, tilting his head at the lantern as if it has had a haircut. You think about the hours ahead when that glass will make dusk behave like a guest. You think about the small pleasure of seeing your own hands competent at something that never asks for applause. You write a narrow line in the ledger lamp cleaned, wick trimmed, reservoir 3/4 full because the night is easier when the day makes a list for it. The rag, now confessing its career in black smudges and golden circles, folds into a square with the clean side outward, so tomorrow believes in you. The shears go to their nail. The funnel returns to its hook. The oil tin clicks shut with a generosity that suggests it is glad to be useful again. Back at the hook, you leave the lantern dark but ready. The room keeps the faint scent of warm metal and a note of oil that says evening will be a manageable sentence. Outside, water makes a small vowel beneath the planks, as if practicing how to speak light later. You rest your palm on the lever, out of habit, out of liking, and feel the day nod underneath your skin. The glass holds your reflection for a breath, and then gives it back to the room, which is exactly what you asked of it. You stand still enough for sound to choose you. The canal carries it like a careful waiter, no spills, no fuss, just arrivals. Far off, a bell tries the air with a single note to ask whether afternoon has remembered itself. You answer by finding your pocket watch, the little round certainty you keep because time prefers to be compared to something. The lid lifts with its practice spring. The face shows a minute hand convinced of its job, and an hour hand that never hurries. 1, 2, 3, another tower, farther off, counts in a slower voice. Rounder, as if the metal were thicker, or the weather more forgiving where it hangs. The nearer bell follows with its own arithmetic. You do not assign either to a name. You assign them to distances. The narrow street bell, the river bell, the market bell. They overlap like ripples, then separate cleanly. You listen for the whiff of echo that comes when sound meets brick, bends around canal corners, and returns with softened manners. Your watch runs a hair, deliberate this week. You know because the bells have been telling you. Not irritably, just firmly. You hold the crown between finger and thumb and set it forward the width of a breath. Then stop and wait to see whether the next quarter validates your guess. You've learned that adjusting time is like trimming a wick's small motions, no speeches. The watch agrees, ticking with the confidence of a tool that will not apologize later. Quarter bells arrive like polite visitors. Some ring the neat 4, each strike the size of a teacup. Some prefer the old pattern that suggests a tune but thinks better of the idea. Fog edits their edges, turning brass into felt. When wind turns, the same bells grow a spine and cut the air like little knives. You notice both effects and write neither down. Not all information improves a page. Some belongs only to ears and day. You lean your elbows on the rail and let the wood teach you how long a minute is. It is as long as the canal between two posts, as long as a gull's unearned confidence, as long as the one breath pause you always take before lifting the latch. Minutes feel different when bells live in them. They lengthen obediently to hold a carillon. They shorten when a single strike refuses conversation. You take the measure without instruments. Wrist, ribs, rope. Closer now. A small bell from a barge speaks briskly 1. Then 2 boat language, not interested in towers. The sound hops across the water and lands on your planks with the accuracy of a thrown coin. You mark nothing on the slate for it. The bridge prefers generosity with sound and precision with chalk. The bell stops. The wake says what it needed to say. Quiet returns to its usual size. You think about the people who live inside those bells, the hands that haul ropes in small circles, the shoulders that have learned to lean at the correct moment, the faces turned toward the clapper with the pleasant seriousness that belongs to work. Somewhere, a man counts in his head and is pleased when his count meets the world. Somewhere else, a mechanism does the same without being pleased. You prefer the sound of both, layered, patient, occasionally wrong. Your pocket watch rests in your palm while you compare tick to strike. The ticks are faster, more private. The strikes are public, willing to be witnessed. When they line up, the day feels tucked in. When they disagree, you do not scold time. You adjust your expectations by a notch. You have found that people who forgive bells have better afternoons than people who argue with them. The ledger receives a small line hour checked. Visibility fair, because writing helps some sounds remain audible later. You ink the note slowly, letting the bell's last breath finish before the period arrives. Outside the window, water answers with its own punctuation. A tap beneath the plank, a sigh against the piling, a hush where a swirl remembers a boat that has already finished with it. The cat lifts an ear and decides none of this requires intervention. Another quarter approaches. You know it not by sky, but by the way the city holds itself. as if taking a breath for a chorus. The first bell leads, the second joins, a third adds itself late with cheerful imprecision. Sound stacks like chairs in a hall. You check your watch again, find yourself aligned, and shut the lid with the small click that tells you order is capable of existing. You place the watch back in the waistcoat pocket, where warmth has made a home for it. Between bells, you try the lever's weight as a kind of metronome. Down an inch, hold tick-tick-tick up a whisper, rest tick-tick-tick. The mechanism approves the companionship. When the next barge lifts a hand, you meet its request at the top of the minute. Not because minutes care, but because you do. The span climbs. The tower beyond finishes its brief recital. The day resumes its agreeable prose. You think of nights when sound travels, farther frost evenings, when metal speaks sharply. Summer nights when heat makes bells buttery. You think of snow, which teaches bells to wear coats, of rain, which slicks them and calms their confidence. You do not think of the hour as anything more than a room you walk through. Bells furnish it. You dust nothing but keep everything in place. A boy on the opposite quay tries to imitate a bell with the lid of a pot. His sister convinces him to be a bridge instead, and he becomes planks with dignity while she parades a toy boat beneath him. Their mother rings no bell at all. She claps once, and the game turns into another. You do not record any of this. You let it live where it belongs, in the common air that returns it to silence without regret. The next strike finds you ready without effort. You count because people count. You also listen because listening is more accurate. The note blooms, hangs, and thins. Your head makes the smallest nod at the exact center, that quiet middle where sound turns from rising to falling. You recognize that place as if it had a door and a welcome mat. You feel better for having been there a second. Then you look down the canal. Because bells are for agreement and bridges are for action, and the day is content to offer both. Neighbors collect themselves around a bridge the way ivy finds a wall quietly, with persistence, providing shade you did not ask for but do not mind. The day has settled into its steady gear. Your lever stands ready. The canal speaks in a lowercase voice. From the narrow street, a baker's boy appears with a folded scrap of broadsheet, news pressed into the size of a pocket. He lifts it, as if offering a bird. Prices, he says, which is a kind of blessing, and you trade him yesterday's nail, the tidy square, shouldered sort that knows how to be useful. He admires the nail and pockets it with ceremony. You keep the paper not for the prices, but for the habit of being informed. A carpenter from the quay finds your railing burr with his thumb and nods at your earlier filing. He produces a longer nail in exchange for your short one-neighbor arithmetic. For that rattling shutter, he says, meaning the counterweight house. You accept, because good advice delivered in few words is the best kind. He taps the wood once with his knuckles, hears what he needs, and leaves before the canal can claim the thought. A woman from the brick boat pauses with a basket she does not want to carry any farther than necessary. Bricks and baskets share a talent for being heavier than they look. Mind this? She asks, already confident you will. Apples, wrapped in paper against bruises, make a quiet hill under the cloth. You clear a square by the stove where warmth behaves but does not meddle, and set the basket there. The cat inspects the arrangement, elects not to file a report, and jumps to the window to supervise pigeons instead. You unfold the news scrap and read the city condensed. A market moved, a preacher, long on adjectives, a shipment delayed by someone else's weather. A corner column offers a riddle about wind that thinks it is clever. You fold the paper again, smaller, and tuck it into the ledger where it will behave like a bookmark until it forgets to matter. Outside, a skiff raises a question with its oar, and you answer by opening the span half a breath. The boat slides through, and the oar gives the water a polite parting. A seamstress from 2 doors down leans in to ask whether the lamp will be lit early if the fog returns. You promise to watch the sky as if it were your own laundry, and she laughs the laugh people use when they approve of unnecessary metaphors. In return, she offers a needle with a good eye for your mitten, which remembers being whole. You thank her and put the needle in the small wrapped roll where your spare pins live, because order is a cupboard you can always open. A man with a barrel pauses to ask if you have seen his cousin's cheese boat. You have not, which is information too, and you point with your chin upriver where the water suggests something heavy, but not yet visible. He He leaves a wedge of hard cheese because people like to pay even when you have not charged. You set it beside the apples and pretend the cat cannot count. Small favors accumulate like soft weather. Someone asks you to hold a letter until dusk. You place it under the ledger ribbon, where it will be safe from drafts and curiosity. A girl brings a coil of twine to borrow 2 arms length. You measure it against the beam and cut it where your chalk mark suggests equality. She thanks you with a string of earnest compliments for the cat. The cat receives them with his usual professionalism. You test the new nail on the shutter. It sits straighter, as if flattered into good posture. You rub a whisper of tallow on the hinge, so it will remember its manners in wind. The carpenter was right. The small rattle that had been composing a future becomes history. You scratch a single line on your beam where the housekeeping codes live. S fixed, C thanked. These marks are not important to anyone else. That is their charm. A boy with a hoop chooses your span as a proving ground. You hold the lever ready but still, letting him roll his circle from hinge to latch without interruption. The circle sings against the boards in happy tin. When he turns at the end, he salutes the lever with the respect usually reserved for officers and saints. You return a grave nod because bridges enjoy ceremony at least as much as churches do. The apples in the basket shift as if clarifying their arrangement. You lift the cloth and set one apple on the sill in the small pool of light the early sun has left. Even fruit enjoys a view. Steam from the kettle fogs the glass for a blink. The apple becomes an idea, then a fruit again. You refrain from eating it, not out of virtue, but out of neighborliness. The lamplighter passes early, not to work, but to look at tomorrow. He asks how the hinge likes the damp today. You answer that iron prefers opinions to moods. He agrees and touches the lantern hook like it is a friend he is remembering. You trade him a scrap of wick for a strip of rag. He claims he can polish anything with it. You plan to test that on a stubborn corner of brass later. In the corner, a tiny pile appears. A square nail, a needle and paper, a loop of twine, a letter, a rag strip, a wedge of cheese waiting for its rightful owner to forget to reclaim it. This is the city condensed into a table, things trusted to your care, because your door opens onto water, and because you have the habit of being where you are supposed to be. The afternoon leans forward a little. A barge of peat announces itself with the smell that turns rooms into memories. You lift and lower, with the rhythm of someone who has been speaking the same kindly sentence all his life. The basket breathes its apple scent. The letter sits under the ribbon like a modest secret that is not yours. A neighbor calls from the far side, asking whether you will still be here at dusk. You answer as you always do, with a nod that includes the lever, the ledger, the cat, the lantern, and the agreeable business of minding what is handed to you until the person who handed it remembers you exist. When the carpenter returns, you give him the news scrap because he likes to read about prices while pretending not to. The woman reclaims her basket with many thanks, and 1 apple fewer you insist, and the cat pretends he never considered auditing. You enter nothing about apples in the ledger. You write only that the bridge behaved, the day held, and neighbors traded their small currency with interest. The lever warms your palm. The canal, satisfied with itself, licks the piling with a gentle, repetitive vowel. The city continues its long exchange without raising its voice. You decide. The hour has the right quiet for repairing small loyalties. The mitten that has stood by you through frost and lever and rope sits on the peg like a veteran who has earned a chair. Its thumb remembers last week's work wool thin to a tired window, a little run beginning to audition for disaster. You take it down and turn it inside out, the way you turn a thought to see where it frays. The seam looks honest. The cuff keeps its temper. It is the thumb that asks for manners. You fetch the mending roll from the shelf, the one tied with string that remembers knots. Inside, 2 needles, one modest, one ambitious. A stub of beeswax polished by years. A length of spare yarn saved from the mitten's birth. A sliver of soap for marking. A small wooden egg that carries the shape of thumbs in its memory. You set the egg inside the thumb and feel the wood make a firm sky for stitches. The grain is smooth as old advice. Threading belongs to mouths as much as fingers. You moisten the yarn's end, twist, pinch, aim. The needle accepts without debate. You draw the double length smooth and pass it over the beeswax once, twice, until the wool remembers obedience. The knot you tie has no name. It simply knows when to stop proving itself. You lay the roll open near the ledger, even repairs like witnesses. You begin with a circle of small anchoring stitches around the tired place, landing each step in healthy wool the way a careful walker touches stepping stones. The needle whispers through, a sound like a pencil in the margin of a familiar book. In and out, the thumb learns a new heartbeat. Beneath the planks, the canal keeps time in its old consonants. Now the weaving. You run a ladder of tidy passes straight across the gap, a little bridge inside a bigger bridge. The wooden egg holds the shape. Your hand keeps the tension even. When the warp is patient enough, you turn and begin the weft. Over one, under one, laying each crossing neatly so no future finger will complain. The yarn has opinions. You persuade rather than argue. It agrees by becoming quiet. The cat arrives to supervise, choosing a post just close enough to contribute the warmth of his gaze. He resists the thread with all his might by pretending not to see it. His tail performs a calm commentary. Once, he chooses to catch a strand of light instead of your yarn, which is the sort of intelligence you like to reward. A knuckle rubbed along the jaw earns a millstone purr. Then professional detachment resumes. Outside, a whistle tests the street and learns modesty. You narrow the weave where the run tried to become a story, widen it to meet soundcloth, and bury old loose ends until they lose the will to wander. A gull remarks on governance. You ignore its platform. Inside, the stitch rhythm steadies your shoulders more efficiently than talk. You test the inside with a fingertip, eyes closed, because skin knows what eyes forgive. The mend lies flat, neither proud nor shy. You add a border of whip stitches around the patch, snug as a buttoned coat. Each stitch takes the same amount of care. That is dignity. You breathe slowly over the egg and watch the wool remember warmth before it feels it. A barge asks politely for room. You set the mitten in the open roll, take the lever, and give the canal its path. The span rises with the readiness earned earlier by oil and patience. The boat passes, scattering light. You lower, latch, and return to the needle without losing the thread of the afternoon. Work continues its sentence. The last passes. Pull the mend into the native cloth until the join becomes an agreement rather than a border. You carry the thread to the inside and hide the knot under a friendly loop, a small secret that deserves to be forgotten. The needle returns to its paper with a soft tap. You withdraw the egg. The thumb keeps its new shape, pleased to be restored to usefulness rather than promoted to ornament. You turn the mitten right side out and slide your hand inside. The mend greets your thumb with the polite firmness of a well-made handshake. No ridge, no sulk, only the feeling that the world is ready to be gripped again. You curl and uncurl, testing the places that used to complain. Silence, and a small gratitude that needs no speech. You try the mate for fairness, and decide it deserves a glance later, not from need, but equity. Tools go home, beeswax wrapped, yarn coiled with the nicer side outward, egg wiped with the hem of your shirt, and laid where it will not pretend to be an apple. You mark a neat line on the beam M thumb mended, and add a dot, because dots please you. The mitten returns to its peg, about as proud as wool knows how to be. The cat stretches his question mark into an exclamation and approves your progress with a gentle head against your shin. You wash your hands in the basin. Water catches a few obedient fibers. Drying them by the stove, you watch steam lift in quiet threads. The room has that private brightness that comes when something small has been set right. You note the hour, not because repairs must be timed, but because time enjoys being told it has participated. Then, you rest your palm on the lever and find the same answer you always find there. Ready, steady, without fuss. The mitten, catching a draft, turns slightly on its peg, as if listening for weather. Cloud thinks about becoming rain, and then decides, politely, to do so. You pull your collar up and let the first fine beads collect on the wool until the fabric changes from opinion to fact. Drizzle is a reasonable weather. It lowers the city's voice to a tone that suits work. Brick takes a softer color. Rope shows its little hairs as if surprised to be seen. The canal forgets about reflections and practices texture instead. You look to the planks first. Damp boards remember the last pair of careless souls quicker than you do. You take the bucket with sand and the small scoop and lay a careful path across the span. Not thick, just a dusting that tells boots where to place their intentions. On the hinge end, you add a shade more, because hinges believe in irony. The sand makes a subdued whisper under your steps, a sound like someone turning a page in a book they have read before. The latch bed collects a rim of water. You brush it clear with the stiff broom, then give the tongue a quick wipe so it won't pretend to be shy later. Metal looks better when it is admired, but it works better when it is dry. You fold your rag to a clean corner and pat the rail where hands will land without asking. The smear your glove leaves is tidy enough to count as a clean. Drizzle has a grammar. Tap, hush, tap, hush. It writes on the sill in sentences that slide toward the corner and then make their case for the bucket. You angle the bucket so drips are encouraged to become useful. A small economy that keeps the floor from being too interested in puddles. From the counterweight house, a single drop conducts an ambitious solo and lands on the board with a note you know by ear. You find the seam above and offer a patient thumb of putty unofficial, competent, appreciated. The rope swells a fraction, as ropes will when they are reminded of their childhood. You feel the change with 2 fingers, the lay just a breath fuller, the surface as honest as always. A measured lift proves loyalty. The counterweight rises without argument. The chain walks. The pins keep their temper. You let the span return to earth and listen for any new syllable in the settling. Only the new quiet of water. No complaint. You reward the system with a dab of oil at the pin that likes to rehearse problems in wet weather. It chooses not to perform. Inside, the stove earns its keep by chasing chill out of sleeves. You set the kettle at an angle and let it mumble. Damp carries its own smell rope. Wool, the metal underside of the sky, and the stove adds peat to make the room remember where it lives. You tilt your hat and let one runnel leave the brim. The drop hits the ash bucket and becomes a particle of history. You pretend not to notice the cat choosing the dry board under the stove's shadow. The sort of tactical genius you can only applaud. People walk differently in Drizzle. They become conspirators with themselves heads slightly down. Strides pragmatic, shoulders impartial. A woman passes with an umbrella that has decided not to fully exist. She laughs at it and keeps half her day dry anyway. A boy dashes and then corrects himself into a walking person in honor of sanded boards. You add a little nod to tell him the bridge has noticed his maturity. He pretends not to glow. Across the canal, a gutter fails its argument and spills with dignity. The water finds the cobbles and chooses 3 paths at once. You choose not to advise it. The smell of yeast wanders out of a doorway, meets the smell of wet rope, and the 2 shake hands like cousins at a gathering. You breathe both and call it lunch-adjacent air. Your coat remembers that it is oiled cloth and proves it. You check the lantern glass for dots that will dry into honesty later. A quick pass with the corner of the rag makes tomorrow kinder. The hook gets a small twist to ensure it will not grow theatrical in a gust. The chimney cap rotates a hair to keep rain from becoming enthusiastic. Each movement is a voter's mark in a tiny election no one else will audit. A tug appears, its funnel sending up a thin remark that Drizzle immediately edits. The signal is a modest lift of a hand. You return the same and lift the span with an extra second of patience, because wet timber appreciates being persuaded rather than commanded. The tug's wake comes smaller than the weather promised. It pats the posts and moves on. You lower the bridge and hear that beautiful, damped, thud-less drum. More pillow, a good sound for a wet day. You spread another palm of sand by the latch because formality is cheap. Then you stand under the eave and watch the rain assume it is permanent. Drizzle never is, but it likes to rehearse. You inspect the gutter seam above the door, squeeze a line of compound where 2 boards have decided to continue a conversation they should have ended, and smooth it with your thumb. The thumb becomes important. You wipe it on the rag and it becomes anonymous again. The slate disapproves of wet, so you keep it in the lee of the window and dry your hand before you tally. 2 ticks for brick, 1 for peat. A dash for beer that arrived, disguised as patience. You add, Drizzle settled, to the remark line in the ledger, because the weather has joined the staff for the afternoon. The dot at the end serves as the period the rain itself refuses to supply. When the shower grows finer than breath, you take the broom once more across the span to persuade the sand into an even courtesy. A pigeon tests the railing with a foot that prefers friction. It approves your work by not falling off. The cat extends a paw into the radiance near the stove and draws it back, perhaps to file a note. Heat continues to be hot. You file a matching note. Rain continues to be wet. Both findings strike you as actionable. By the time you set the broom back on its peg, the light has organized itself into a coherent gray. You touch the lever because habit is weatherproof, and the lever returns the favor by being exactly what it was before the first bead fell ready. Unromantic, patient. Drizzle, having softened everything it came to soften, reduces itself to a rumor of itself and drifts down canal to trouble someone else's clarity. You let it go with professional courtesy and a clean latch. You catch the tug first by its smell, hot iron and damp coal, a breakfast for air that has already eaten fog. Then the sound comes steady, as a man who does not apologize chuff, chuff the breath of a thing whose lungs are cylinders. The funnel appears like a blunt pencil rising from a child's drawing, black scolding the softer day. You rest your palm on the lever and feel the bridge make a small decision to be cooperative. The skipper's hand lifts in a practical curve. You answer with the latch, the click you like, and the lever moves through its familiar arc. Weight gathers where it should. The counterweight in its little house clears its throat. Chain and pin remember their lines. The span climbs, plank by plank, and you hold it balanced just long enough to make room for the tug's certainty. On the deck, a man in a cap stands with his feet, speaking to the planks. The planks answer by staying. The funnel throws up a ribbon that rain has taught to be modest. Soot flickers into the air like tiny birds that forgot why they rose. The tug's bow presses a new thought into the canal, a wedge that arranges water into cooperation. The rope to the first barge hums a line you feel in your knuckles, even from here. You watch for the small things, the coil that will not leap, the fender that will not sulk, the board that will not test your patience. Nothing misbehaves. The day prefers sense. Under your span, the wake writes a capital letter, and then a paragraph. It touches the pilings with small, repeated hands. The far wall of brick receives a shaken version of itself and does not complain. You count to 5 out of habit, not to time the passage, but to ask the water, to remember how to be itself after the tug has persuaded it to be otherwise. The answer begins at 4 and finishes by 6. You lower the bridge with the same care you would use to put a book back where it lives. The latch settles. That soft, particular thud arrives, the one you could recognize in your sleep. But the water is still telling the story the tug started. It climbs and drapes, returns, climbs again, finding edges you did not expect to have opinions. You lean on the rail above the hinge and feel the quiver pass through wood into your sleeve. The bridge does not mind. It likes to be reminded that it is alive in parts. Just here, at the corner where the current braids with the tug's insistence, a little world gathers and loosens, as if practicing. A feather from some earlier negotiation spins twice, and then adopts a sensible course. A cork bumps the piling, and remembers, rather late, that it floats. On the sill, a grain of ash from the funnel lands among your clean brass and looks guilty until you wipe it away with 2 fingers and no fuss. The cat opens one eye to acknowledge that the world has made a louder syllable, and then closes it again, concluding that the syllable does not contain fish. A pigeon, less philosophical, lifts to a safer railing and gives you advice you do not require. You recommend patience to it with a look you have perfected for gulls and boys. The pigeon considers the argument and decides wisely to study the cobbles instead. You mark the slate with your sign, for tug 2 short dashes joined, like oars that have agreed to pull together. Beneath it you set a small diagonal, meaning wake noticeable. Pedestrians asked to wait. No grievances. On the beam, you add a modest cross, to remind yourself to look at the near pin again later, not because it argued, but because it has a history of thinking about it on days like this. The chalk leaves its delicate noise. Dust rises and sits back down, edified. When the first echoes of motion have become the ordinary shuffle of the canal, you walk the boards from latch to hinge. Your boot tests each plank. Each answers with the sort of reply you get from friends familiar. Lightly amused, at the very center you pause and look down through the gaps. Water runs under, as under always does. But calmer now, the tug's handwriting reduced to a final underline. You like this part, the settling. When the world performs competence without applause, a boy with a parcel appears at the near end, measuring your face for permission. You give it with a nod and a brief hand. The boards are still wet with yesterday's drizzle and today's story, and he reads your message like a grown person. He crosses, parcel held as if it were a sleeping hen. Steps learning from the sand you spread earlier. On the far side, he turns to look at the water, surprised that something can be both busy and calm. You sympathize. You lift the lantern from its hook, not to light it, only to set it back more squarely now the tug's breath has passed. The glass shows a faint new mist inside, which the room heat dismisses in a blink. The hook has kept its promise. You hold a page of the ledger against the window and write a line that takes up less space than thought. Tug 2 barges, passage mild, wake modest, hinge content. The dot at the end is almost invisible. You like it that way. From downstream, the tug's voice continues for a while. Talking to bridges you do not know well enough to have opinions about you. You think of the chain of keepers, each with a lever polished by a different palm, each calling the same measured answers to slightly different questions. It pleases you that a machine can be loud and good manners at the same time, and that water can choose, after all that chuff and insistence, to become the same metal gray it was before, as if it forgives without forgetting. You put the slate back on its nail, and step once along the rail to see whether soot has asked to stay anywhere. It is not wanted. A soft touch with the rag persuades each speck to continue its travels. The gull, now that drama has left, lands with a thump and pretends it never made a scene. The cat moves to the warmer square as the stove's confidence spreads. You rest your palm on the lever and feel nothing new, the right outcome. You look down the canal, where nothing is in a hurry to arrive, and let your shoulders release the small inventory they took during the passage. The day resumes its plain prose, and you resume being its punctuation useful commas, a few semicolons, no need for exclamation. Afternoon does not arrive so much as it relaxes into place. You feel it in the way the light stops trying to prove itself, and agrees to be enough. The canal lowers its voice to a hum. Brick forgets it as a color and becomes texture. Your shoulders release a small inventory they did not know they were keeping. You test the minute with a breath. It holds. Nothing asks for the lever. This is not idleness. It is intermission. You let your eyes take their slow walk. The corner of the counterweight house, where paint has chosen 2 shades of the same idea. The gauge board stripes wearing water as a sash. Across the canal, a shutter sticks, thinks, and obeys. A woman shakes a rug with a rhythm that improves the air. You count the grays without choosing a favorite. Slate of roof, pewter of water, wool of sky, ash of gull, smoke of pipe, the agreeable steel of the lever itself. The list softens your thoughts the way sand softens footsteps. You try a second list greens this time, and discover the moss in the mortar, a narrow smear on the far quay, and the cat's eyes when he opens them just enough to show an opinion. You keep these lists where breath lives. The planks under your boots tell you stories if you wait. This one has a shallow bruise from last winter's skate. That one remembers the nail you moved 2 summers back. The next creaks in a tone you have learned to call reassuring. You step from hinge to latch, not measuring, only relearning what you know. The span answers with its quiet grammar. Give, accept, return. The kettle has reached the mutter that means you may pour whenever you wish. You do not wish yet. Let it think it is working hard while it stays warm. A blackbird lands, consults the railing, refuses to be a gull, and leaves. The gull declines to be a blackbird and stays. The cat, committing to the role of afternoon authority, shifts exactly the width of his spine to remain in the square of moving sun. A scrap of paper turns on the cobbles like a tiny sail. It catches, releases, then gives up and hides against a post. You feel a kind regard for its obedience to small forces. The smell of yeast meets a damp sweetness from the canal. For a moment, the room tastes like bread soaked in stories. You breathe out slower than you breathed in, and the kettle quiets a fraction, as if recognizing leadership. You take the pencil and sharpen it, though it does not require it. The way you tidy a sentence already clear. The curl falls in a single strip and coils at your thumb like a wooden hair. You press the point lightly to the ledger margin, just to let it know you are nearby. Then you leave the pencil on the sill with its point facing the modest future. On the far quay, a boy kneels to float a stick and then walks beside it with his hands in his pockets, as if not caring whether the stick keeps up. It does. None of this requires record. All of it belongs to the afternoon's employment. Noticing until noticing becomes the same as resting. You pass your fingers along the rail to find the cool place, the warm place, the indifferent middle. The cool place tells you where the draft keeps its headquarters. The warm place reminds you that brass stores sunlight like a miser hoarding coins. The middle argues for moderation and wins. You place your palm there for a count of 12 and discover that counts improve when they are not compelled. On the beam above the window, a tiny spider begins a line, reconsiders, and anchors elsewhere with admirable professionalism. A dove somewhere practices the same note without apology. The water below repeats a syllable you have heard all your life and still cannot spell. It is better that way. You let it continue its thoughtful mistake. At last you pour, and the ribbon of steam sketches a brief bridge between cup and air. One sip is merely warm. The next remembers bitterness and becomes useful. You lean your hip against the table, cup nested in both hands, and let your gaze blur until the day becomes shapes, then light, then nothing you could describe to anyone who wasn't standing exactly where you are. A hat appears downstream, becomes a head, becomes a skipper, becomes a request raised just high enough to count as language. Your hand reaches the lever so naturally it surprises neither of you. The span rises, with the calm of an answer to a question that has been asked every day since bridges were invented. The barge passes. The wake erases its own ambition. The latch closes, pleased to be necessary. The lull does not break, it adjusts, as a river does around a piling, as thought does around a sensible obstacle. You set the cup down and hear the small porcelain note it makes on wood. That sound joins others on the day's invisible shelf. Bell at a distance, stove ticking in private mathematics, rope declining to explain itself. You stand a moment longer, to be sure there is nothing you have failed to hear. There is always more. There is always enough. The afternoon holds. You record nothing. You change nothing. You remain at your post the way a word remains in a sentence after it has given up the urge to be important. Then you check the latch with 2 fingers and discover, exactly as expected, that it is fine. You decide the afternoon has the right weight for tidy handwriting. Not the ceremonial weight of signatures, not the hurried weight of notes taken standing, just the ordinary gravity that keeps columns polite. You open the ledger to the morning's page and then to the fresh one beside it, the pair making a quiet gait. The paper has a soft tooth that invites graphite without scuffing. You take the pencil from the sill, roll it once between finger and thumb so the point finds its preferred face, and let the hand calm down to the speed of lines. Sharpening is a conversation. The knife asks what sort of point you mean to make. The cedar answers by releasing a ribbon the color of tea. You shave in small admissions, letting the lead emerge as a gray thought, not a needle that breaks its heart on the first emphatic stroke. A modest cone, strong enough to stand and blunt enough to listen. You test on the corner, 1 line, 1 dot, 1 tiny square. All 3 declare themselves prepared. You draw the chair toward the window until the light chooses you. The columns wait. Hour, direction, vessel, cargo, remarks. Your hand knows the starting height of each letter because it has practiced at this desk long enough for muscle to become clerk. You copy from the slate and from pocket memory, translating ticks and circles into words that leave no fingerprints. Pete, 5. The P sits like a respectful boot. The tail of the 5 remembers not to swagger. Brick, 7 crates. Boxes become a number that will still be true tomorrow. Graphite whispers across the paper like rain 2 streets away. You allow the strokes to be steady rather than pretty. These letters are for strangers who may never see them. They are also for you tomorrow, when memory will pretend it always knew this. In the margin, you set the small signs you invented, 2 dots for a wake that asked to be noticed, a caret for advice offered and declined, a short dash for the Gull's editorial. Their meanings are comfortable rather than exact, which is the right kind of useful. The canal appoints itself metronome. Between words you listen to the low vowel of water under the planks, the interval sound between bell and bell. The rope gives a single contented tick, as if to mark a paragraph. You keep the wrist soft and the elbow quiet, letting weight fall from finger to paper without proving anything. When the point dulls, you turn the pencil a quarter and continue with a fresh facet. When the facets are spent, the knife resumes its civil question. You answer with another small cone of patience. Numbers behave differently than letters, so you accommodate them. Your ones are modest door frames. Your twos learn a bend from old maps. Your threes stay patient and closed. Mouthed, the date receives its own lane at the bottom, set off by a short rule so it won't wander. Weather joins the remarks in the tone you prefer. Drizzle settled, lantern prepared, hinge content. Anyone reading would think the day lacks story. You hope it will, a knock at the door light, as if asking not to be counted. You set the pencil down, lift the latch, and accept a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. Return this to the cheesemonger if he passes. You slide it under the ledger ribbon where errands live without urgency. Not every kindness belongs on a page. The cat approves by relocating to the warm square nearest your boot and becoming punctuation. Back at the window, you check the watch against the nearest bell. The two shake hands satisfactorily. The quarter's arrivals receive modest lines. Tug with barge, 1. Skiff downbound, courteous, timber under tarp, no complaint. You resist describing how the tarp sighed around its corners. The ledger is a city of nouns. Sighing belongs to the air. When the point begins to smudge, you pause and breathe. Not because it sharpens lead, but because pausing sharpens you. The paper waits. You lift a wandering tail from the next column with a small eraser, dusting crumbs away with the back of your hand. The page looks as if it has always been careful. That is the proper illusion. You total the morning's tallies with the mild arithmetic of adding chairs around a table. The sum arrives without surprise. You draw the crossbar that gathers the fifth stroke and place beside it a dot to report the absence of anything anyone could argue was drama. The dot has become your most faithful mark. It says nothing happened, which means everything did what it should. Outside, a cart makes wooden syllables. A laugh tumbles once and folds itself away by distance. You let those sounds enter the page only as steadiness in your line. A brief sunbright puddle slides across the window. Your letters lighten and then return to their normal weather. The knife returns to the sill. The pencil settles point up in the mug, and the ledger receives a gentle closing of covers. The book's version of a nod. You stand and smooth the crease your sleeve made along the paper's edge. A small favor to future hands. The entries will dry into fact while you attend to the lever. You touch the latch in passing, pull the rag from the hook to remove a quiet smear you had not earned, and return the chair to its angle. The room feels squared again, figures waiting to be believed. Afternoon, willing to be longer than it needs to be. Before you leave the window, you open the ledger once more, and add a single word you forgot, but would have remembered tomorrow. Cheese. The word sits between brick and beer, unflustered, correctly spelled. You breathe in, and the page smells faintly of cedar and graphite and something like rain. You breathe out, and the canal answers with a syllable that might be agreement. You let the book rest. Your hand continues a heartbeat longer, feeling the shape of letters that no longer need it. Then the lever, patient as ever, takes your palm the way paper takes words willingly, without fuss, ready for whatever needs recording next. You step to the center plank and feel the afternoon hold you up with ordinary grace. Your boots sit light, your palm rests on the rail, and the canal says exactly what it has been saying all day. Still, the texture underfoot wakes a memory last winter, when the water forgot how to move, and the city remembered it could glide. It begins with air that snaps silk thin inside your lungs, a cold that takes your words and arranges them on the windows. The boards wear whitened grain, iron grows a beard of rhyme, the rope stiffens into a polite argument. You sand the span in two careful paths and lay ashes where the slope thinks about becoming ambition. The latch performs its music with a slower tongue. Lantern glass fogs at the edges while the flame stays steady. Along the frozen canal, the first testers arrive, the cautious, booted kind who tap with heels and decide that courage is arithmetic. Then the easy ones, laces looped, blades slung, breath visible as signatures. Someone sets a chair on the ice for a grandmother who supervises by knitting. A new game is invented and turns out to be yesterday's. Laughter travels farther on frost. Your span stays clear because you make it so. You scrape seams with the square end of the broom. You chase snow from the hinge teeth. You rub a thumb of tallow where the latch would like to dream. There is a way to place sand so it persuades rather than scolds. Boots cross in pairs and small herds. Careful looks exactly like brave when ice is involved. The first clean scrape of iron on ice is always a letter, then another, and a phrase. Soon the day is writing in long lines that bend around corners without punctuation. The sound comes up through the planks to your bones. A thin silver singing rubbed with a low hush. Blades tick at seams like sewing machines that believe in winter. When the light lies low, the canal becomes a sheet of graphite with 1,000 names written at once. You remember the boy who learned to skate by holding his father's scarf like a tow rope? Step, slide, laugh, recover, try again. You remember the girl who could draw arcs so even that the cat paused on the sill to consider hiring her for whisker inspection. A baker passed with a tray strapped to his back, selling buns that steamed. Tug crews on holiday turned into philosophers of edges and balance. Skaters asked you to raise the span out of habit, then laughed when they remembered they could duck under the timber and appear on the other side without a boat's permission. You lifted anyway once or twice, not because it was required, but because ritual keeps joints limber. Lantern light wrote gold ovals on the ice. Skates sliced them into petals. Bells became glass. Chimneys drew pencil lines into a sky emptied of weather. There were rules, most of them polite. Avoid the black ice at the bend, where the sluice argues with physics. Mind the broom sign you left near the hinge where snow liked to gather. Wave at pedestrians who walk the bridge because walking feels true when the world pretends to be stone. Children kept to the margins until someone brave taught them the middle will forgive if you listen. One bitter morning the rope lifted like a board, stiff and honest, and you wrapped it in burlap to keep its humor. The lever felt heavier iron borrowing the season's refusal. You warmed the latch with your palm, counted to 12, and language returned to metal. That day the ice sang lower, as if the canal had adopted a deeper voice to address seriousness. There were failures, small and instructive. A proud man learned that skates have an opinion about posture. A distracted woman rediscovered friction by sitting down. No harm, only laughter edited by embarrassment. You lent a mitten to a boy who had outgrown the idea and returned to it gratefully. He brought it back with an apology that warmed better than the stove. What you loved was the afternoon after the morning's boasting, when tavern windows glowed, when breath rose like gulls and settled like pigeons, when skaters loosened their knees into poems. The city slid past itself without hurry. People who would not have greeted on cobbles nodded on ice. Balance requires allies. You kept the span honest, offered sand at the right inches, set the lantern higher when fog tried to rule winter. Then a day came when the thaw began as a secret. You heard it before you named it. A soft chuckle beneath a board. A sigh where a crack stitched itself wider. The first gray puddle appeared with the dignity of a messenger. You posted polite warnings and fetched the broom for the last time. Blade marks grew spongy, then vanished. The canal remembered water. Skates returned to hooks and winter to the shelf where it waits for permission. Now, with boots on dry planks and afternoon on good terms with itself, you can feel all of that without needing it to return. The span under you carries echoes in its grain, a ledger of colder verbs written in wood. You test the latch. It answers in the season you are standing in. Somewhere, a gull tries to pronounce January and gets bored halfway. You let the present keep the floor. You turn the broom on its bristles and tap the handle twice on the plank, a private toast to safe ice and sensible sand, to lantern glass and laughing falls, to rope that forgave and iron that remembered. The canal hums its current song, which never truly leaves, even under helmets of winter. You breathe the mild air and write one quiet line in today's ledger, afternoon steady. The wood beneath your boots agrees by being exactly itself. You clear a space on the window shelf and let the cards breathe. They are soft at the corners, easy to shuffle, friendly to hands that prefer quiet. You square the deck twice enough to be honest, not enough to be superstitious, and deal 7 rows the way your fingers remember. Each last card turns face up like a small permission. The room leans in a fraction. Even the kettle listens. A black 6 finds a red 7 and accepts the invitation. A red 4 slips under a black 5 and travels. A patient king waits for a home. A queen pretends not to mind. You move pieces as if shifting chairs for neighbors, nothing abrupt, everything with a reason. Outside, water says the same sentence it has said all day. Your hands match its pace. From the stock, a 3 that helps, a jack that teases, a card that is only future. You set them down without hurry. The cat claims the far corner of the shelf and pretends to read. His whiskers approve when a column clears, and you lay a king with his court in calm procession. A skiff asks for nothing and passes. You pause with the lever for the length of a comma. Light opens a thin gold pane across the cards. The red suits glow like brick after rain. The black ones become sober rails. You turn the next, and the next. Some help, some decline. Patience does not reward speed. It rewards standing still long enough for a thing to show why it belongs. You are good at that already. A column empties to bare wood. The room grows larger by an inch. You seat a waiting king, then walk queen, jack, 10 into order until the small parade exhausts itself. The last move is minor but sweet. A deuce that unlocks a run you almost abandoned. You do not play to finish. You play to let the cards decide when they are through with you. The stock empties. Reconciliation refuses politely. You gather the rows into one deck, squaring edges that had begun to think about freedom. The cards slide into their sleeve, the sleeve into the drawer where tools live that tell time how to pass without counting. You write nothing in the ledger but the hour and a dot, and return your hand to the lever, as if picking up a sentence you have been reading aloud all day. You find the letter under the ledger ribbon, a polite guest who waited without tapping. Brown paper holds its fold. Twine remembers a double knot. You loosen both as if unbuttoning weather. The paper inside carries faint blue lines and a hand you know by the way it leans when telling ordinary things. You stand at the window because light behaves there. News arrives in small parcels. The roof no longer sulks at rain. Beans have decided to be generous. The cat at home has discovered a new corner of the oven to guard. A baby next door finds her first teeth and asks the street to notice. None of this requires action. All of it asks to be believed. You believe it gladly. The gust that presses the window lifts the page. You hold a corner down with one finger. Ink smells of tea left on the stove. There is a question about your mitten thumb and whether you remembered to mend it. You flex your hand and answer aloud, yes, which the room accepts as official. Halfway down comes the sentence you were waiting for without admitting it. You are doing fine there, we know it. Not praise, permission. Your shoulders set down a burden they had been carrying as if it were part of your uniform. Outside, a skiff receives and returns nothing more dramatic than distance. There is bread advice for damp days, keep the loaf near the back of the stove, and a reminder to send a line when the lanterns come earlier. At the bottom, the hand grows rounder. Tell me if the gull apologized. You smile and give the gull another week. You fold the paper along its old creases, smooth the edges, and tie an easier knot. The letter returns to the ribbon where errands sleep without anxiety. In the ledger, you write one modest word post and then touch the lever for no reason except that the letter has made your hands gentler again. The canal breathes. Your name, written at the top of the page, keeps working. Late light slides along the canal as if it had waited behind a curtain all day. You feel it first on your knuckles, the small warmth that makes tools friendlier, and then on the glass, where the window learns a gentler opinion of the world. Across the water, gables put on evening colors. Panes kindle one by one like thoughtful answers. You stand where the lever meets the rail and let the hour arrange you. The canal, pewter all morning, polishes itself into a darker metal, with a thin seam of silver where a breeze rehearses. Reflections climb brick, misbehave, then regain their manners. A coot draws a black hyphen and dots it with ripples. The punctuation pleases you. Lantern glass, cleaned earlier, takes this light like a promise already kept. You lift the hood to be sure the draft collar will mind you later. It turns with the grace of a hinge that has been spoken to kindly. You leave the lamp unlit. Dusk is not a problem yet, only a proposal. Neighbors soften. A woman shakes crumbs from a cloth and watches them become birds. A tailor steps outside to thread a needle where light is honest. On the far quay, a child tries his name against a wall and receives it back, edited for usefulness. Your bridge, pleased to be background, holds still. The stove settles into evening arithmetic, less boast, more hearth. The cat moves to the warm square the floor has decided to remember. In the ledger, you write only. Light improving. Water even. A barge approaches, as if it learned manners from the sun. You lift and lower, with the calm of an answer invited every day since bridges existed. Windows continue to bloom in rows. Some show a kettle, some a table, some only a picture frame shadow. The water copies nearly everything and improves almost nothing. That restraint is its charm. You rest your palm on the lever, feel the late warmth, and let the hour place a long, careful comma in the day. You agree by doing nothing. You open the little drawer where upkeep lives, and let its small civilization breathe. Oil with its thumb dent, graphite in a stubborn round, tallow folded like a pastry, rags stacked smooth, rough, sacrificial. The brush with loyal bristles laid across like a baton. You lift each once, tools like being counted even without a test. The soot pan goes first. You set it under the hinge bed and coax down what the week has stored soft black that behaves like forgotten chalk. The brush barely speaks. A clean fold follows. You tap the pan at the ash bucket and the day becomes a shade cleaner without boasting. You make a fingertip paste of tallow and graphite on a card and offer a P to each hinge pin. A measured turn draws the shine inward until it vanishes into work. No rasp, no reply, only iron agreeing to postpone opinions. The latch prefers plain tallow. Up, down, up click precise, click kind. On the chain, a single drop where links kiss. The lever walks an inch so fresh mouths arrive. Rags sort into their futures. Bright square for glass, darker for iron. A hopeless one knotted so your hand won't ask miracles of it later. The brush earns a trim with the little scissors. Labels find the tin top's hinge, chain, latch, spare, because language calms lids. The counterweight house receives a visit. Sill swept, sheave brushed, axle gifted one modest bead. The door closes with a felted sound you like. The new shutter nail keeps its promise. No rattle when a breeze tests it. Everything returns to its square. Order here is not pride. It is prevention. You stand with your palm on the lever so the room can show you its new quiet. Wood smells a little sweeter. Iron less defensive. In the ledger you write only kit set right, and let the canal answer with its usual agreeable vowel. Evening arrives by degrees, like a careful clerk counting coins. The first bell gives a single note. Roofs catch it and hand it back softly. You lift the lantern from its hook, feel its evening weight, and set it on the sill where the last of daylight admires your earlier cleaning. Wick centered, collar easy, glass clear, everything remembers how to behave. The match scrapes with a small cricket sound. Flame takes the wick, climbs, then settles into a dome willing to be useful. You lower the chimney. A brief haze pearls the glass and vanishes. Draft collar a finger wider, then narrower, until the flame becomes steady speech. You hang the lantern on the middle hook, the one that flatters faces and water equally. Light goes immediately to work on edges. The latch shows its shape. The rail turns polite. Chalk on the slate looks newly certain. Across the canal, windows kindle in uneven rows, orange squares appearing like thoughts that have found their sentences. Your lantern offers a companionable answer, not boast, but reassurance. A late barge approaches with the quiet confidence of someone who knows the route. The skipper lifts his hand just high enough to be understood. You ease the lever. The span rises without commentary. The flame leans with the motion, then regains center, drawing a thin gold thread on the moving water. Men nod. Wake folds itself small. The bridge returns to its agreeable thud. Pedestrians become kindly to their own feet. A woman cradles a parcel like warm bread. Two boys carry a ladder as carefully as truth. A dog crosses twice to prove a point only it understands. You trim the wick the smallest turn and deny soot with a clean rag. The lantern thanks you by simply shining. The city leans toward rest. You keep the coin of light steady. Night begins as a soft correction. Street voices thin. Bells keep their promises. The canal lowers itself into a darker metal. You open the upper window a thumb's width so the room can share the night without letting it take anything. The lantern hums a low vowel. The stove answers with ticks you can almost count. You try the lever's weight in the dark down an inch. Hold, up a whisper, rest. The mechanism mirrors your breath. Rope feels cooler, more concise. Somewhere a boat pole taps once against wood, a blind man's cane for water. You listen long enough to know it is not a request. Reflections simplify into straight lines broken by ripples. The lantern draws a little road along the planks. Moths draft plans, and then choose the larger night instead. You write 2 lines by feel hour, weather, passage 1, and blot without looking. The pen knows this page. Your hand trusts it. A man passes, boots careful, hat low. He lifts 2 fingers. You lift 2 back. The gesture keeps both of you human in a city that remembers to sleep. After he goes, the quiet is larger, but not empty. You hear the far, soft articulation of locks doing their arithmetic upstream. You sit with the window and let the canal breathe for both of you. Night has a slower grammar, long clauses, no argument. You keep one palm on the lever in case the sentence needs a comma. It doesn't. The flame holds its small doctrine. The bridge approves by doing nothing. Snow has been rumored all day. Now it keeps its appointment. First a few scouts, then a gentle, unanimous yes. Flakes tilt through lantern light like folded letters, addressed to everything. You pull the bucket of sand, the scoop, the broom, and make a path the width of sense from latch to hinge. Boards take snow differently. New planks accept it. Old ones negotiate. You dust the slope, lean into corners where boots change their minds, and talk to the latch with your rag until it forgets to be slick. The span answers with a muted tone, as if someone laid felt over its ribs. Across the canal, roofs grow soft backs, barges wear pale shoulders. A boy tests the first inch and learns patience. You nod without making it a lesson. The cat steps to the threshold, decides philosophy is warmer, and returns to the stove's kingdom. You lift once to be sure the counterweight is not insulted by weather. Rope, a fraction stiffer, still obeys. The chain walks with a careful, tidy click. You lower and listen for complaint. None arrives. Flakes thicken. The rail turns to sugared iron. You sweep twice more as the hour deepens. A quiet ritual of kindness to future feet. In the ledger you write, snow beginning, sand laid. The dot that follows feels especially correct. The city hushes. Even gulls agree to read the notice. By morning, the snow has argued itself into slush. The bridge prefers definitions, so you give it one. Sand again, thinner now. Broom, steadier. A wooden paddle for the seams where gray water sulks. You free the drain at the corner with 2 fingers and a small lecture. It repents at once. You walk the span from latch to hinge, pressing each plank with your heel until it tells you the truth. Here soft, there loyal. Near the pin, a sly slickness that yields to grit. The latch bed receives a firm wipe. The tongue answers with a clear click, as if proud to still be language. The counterweight house drips like a clock. You open the door, brush the sheave, and chase a narrow ribbon of meltwater away from rope with a touch of putty. One precise drop for the axle. The wheel decides to be quiet about gratitude. Traffic returns cautiously. A barge wearing a crust of old snow noses through like a tired animal. You lift, you lower, and the wake takes away a small city's worth of thaw. Pedestrians cross with their shoulders negotiated between winter and purpose. When slush thins to shine, you sweep again lighter and leave the sand where it will remember its task. In the ledger, thaw, drain cleared, hinge content. Your gloves steam on the chair back. The room smells of wool and improvement. You hear the relief keeper before you see him, the rhythm of a man who belongs to these planks. Boots pause at the latch. Knuckles tap the door in your private pattern. You answer with the same 2 notes, and he steps in, folding weather from his coat. You trade the day in sentences that already know their shape. Chain quiet. Snow humbled. Lantern easy. He pours from your kettle without asking. You surrender the chair without thinking. Keys exchange palms with the clink of tools changing pockets, not authority. You show him the chalk on the beam. Small marks for soot, hinge, latch, drain. He squints, nods, adds one tiny cross where you meant to and forgot. The ledger opens to your lines. He reads the script the way you would, lips moving around numbers, as if tasting them. There is always one favor. Mind this parcel for the cheesemonger. He sets it under the ribbon and adds a pebble to keep drafts from inventing stories. You point at the burr you filed, the pin you oiled, the shutter nail that behaved. He points at your mittened thumb like a compliment. Before you go, you stand together with hands on the rail and watch the canal say its even sentence. You leave him your heat in the stove and your patience in the room. He leaves you his nod, the old promise that the bridge will continue being exactly itself. You step onto the quay lighter than you arrived. With the day finished, you total the quiet figures. Ticks become numbers. Numbers become a paragraph no one will recite and everyone will depend on. You blot the last line, close the ledger, and feel the covers think about sleep. The lantern lowers to a softer coin. The stove keeps one ember like a remembered name. You walk the span once more. Hinge, center, latch. Each place gives you its familiar reply. The rope, padded, carries on, thinking like rope. The chain, thanked, decides to continue being chain. You lift the latch a finger and set it back. So tomorrow will start with a known sound. The drawer of upkeep closes, tins squared, rags folded to the clean side. The slate has wiped a day's small lives turned into air. The window learns a fainter version of outside. Glass holds your outline for a breath, and then gives it back to the room. You hang the keys on their peg and set the chair straight. The cat chooses the mat like a guardian who doesn't need a reason. At the door, you look once over the water and count the lights that have decided to remain. Enough. You write a final word done small as a button, large as sleep. Then you lift the latch, step out, and let the bridge keep breathing without you until morning. You let the room grow quieter than itself. The lantern holds a small, patient coin of light. The stove keeps a final ember the size of a thumbprint. Outside, water speaks in a careful whisper that becomes the whole alphabet if you stop trying to read it. You stop trying. You lean a shoulder to the rail, and the wood gives back a warmth collected through the day. It is enough. You look down the canal and see nothing you must name. A window, then another, settles into gentler gold and then into the memory of gold. Footsteps become not people but the idea of people. Friendly, distant, going home at a pace that fits the evening. You let your breath match the water out a little longer than in, like a boat gliding after the oar is lifted. The thought pleases you and then drifts away, as thoughts should. You feel the lever beneath your palm, that good, honest curve. It asks for nothing now. Rope sleeps, chain sleeps, pins sleep in their oil. Even the slate, clean of chalk, seems to breathe. You sit without deciding to sit. The chair knows you and does not need your reasons. Somewhere, a bell tries one note and declines a second. Good. One is plenty. The smell is peat gone to softness, iron gone to quiet, wool faintly warm where your sleeve remembers your arm. The cat becomes a comma, and the sentence of the room reads more calmly for it. You close your eyes, and the canal continues, entirely capable of being a canal without audience. You let it. The span will be here in the morning, as it was this morning and the morning before. Your work is the same as sleep now. Keep the simple parts simple. Let water be water. Let night be night. Let the day put itself away with tidy hands. We hope this slow day at an old trade has been a peaceful escape. If you found it comforting, you may like, share, or leave a thoughtful note. And you can subscribe, so you'll be with us for the next quiet craft from the past. End of script. Sweet dreams.